The enslavers represent one of the most ancient and insidious threats to emerge from the roiling depths of the immaterium, their origins stretching back to epochs that predate the formation of the chaos gods themselves. These parasitic entities existed when the galaxy was young, and the barriers between real space and the warp were far more permeable than in the current era. Unlike the demons that serve the ruinous powers, enslavers are not manifestations of specific emotions or concepts given form through mortal belief and psychic resonance. Instead, they are primordial predators that have haunted the psychic landscape since the earliest stirrings of sentient thought across the galaxy. Archaeological xenobiologists and Ordo Malleus scholars who have studied fragmentary records from the Dark Age of technology suggest that enslavers may have been among the first truly intelligent entities to evolve within the warp itself. Their existence appears to be tied to the fundamental architecture of the immaterium, emerging from the psychic substrate that underlies all reality. Where demons require the emotional turmoil and spiritual corruption of mortal beings to maintain their coherence and power, enslavers seem to draw sustenance directly from the raw psychic energy that permeates the warp. This distinction makes them both more alien and more dangerous than their demonic counterparts. The nature of enslaver consciousness differs markedly from both mortal intelligence and demonic awareness. They possess a cold, calculating intellect focused entirely on consumption and reproduction. Their thought patterns, as far as imperial savants can determine from psychic probe readings taken from captured specimens, operate on principles entirely foreign to human understanding. They do not seek glory, worship, or the corruption of souls for ideological purposes. Instead, they view sentient beings as nothing more than resources to be harvested, psychic batteries to be drained, and vessels to be controlled for their own proliferation. The relationship between enslavers and the structure of the immaterium reveals itself through their unique method of manifestation in real space. Unlike demons, which require specific rituals, emotional resonance, or tears in reality to cross into the material universe, enslavers can exploit any sufficiently powerful psychic presence. They do not need worship or summoning circles. They need only detect the psychic emanations of a powerful psyker to begin their invasion process. This fundamental difference in their interaction with the barrier between dimensions suggests they evolved as part of the warp's basic ecosystem rather than as byproducts of mortal psychic activity. Imperial records from the Great Crusade era, preserved in the deepest vaults of the Libraria Sanctus on Terra, contain references to enslavers that describe them as the hunger that walks between thoughts and the parasites of the first darkness. These epithets, found in texts recovered from human colonies that had maintained contact with various Xeno species, hint at a shared galactic understanding of the enslaver threat that transcends species boundaries. The consistency of these descriptions across multiple unconnected civilizations suggests that enslavers have been a persistent threat throughout galactic history. The psychic awakening of sentient species appears to serve as a beacon that draws enslaver attention across vast distances within the warp. When a species develops psychic abilities, whether through natural evolution or artificial enhancement, they create ripples in the immaterium that enslavers can detect and follow back to their source. This predatory relationship has played out countless times across the galaxy's history, with enslavers following the psychic emanations of newly awakened species like carrion feeders drawn to fresh corpses. The process by which enslavers exploit psychic awakening reveals their sophisticated understanding of both warp dynamics and biological systems. They do not simply consume psychic energy indiscriminately. Instead, they appear to cultivate it, allowing psychic populations to develop and strengthen before moving in for large-scale harvesting operations. This behavior suggests a level of strategic thinking and long-term planning that makes them far more dangerous than simple predators. They are farmers of psychic potential, tending their crops across millennia before reaping the harvest. Evidence from various Xenos archaeological sites scattered throughout the galaxy provides disturbing insights into the scope of enslaver predation. Tau Earth-cast excavations in the Damocles Gulf have uncovered the remains of at least 3 distinct civilizations that appear to have been destroyed by enslaver infestations. The sites show characteristic signs of enslaver activity: massive psychic resonance scarring in crystalline structures, the presence of exotic matter consistent with warp intrusion, and most tellingly, the complete absence of any remains that show signs of psychic development. Eldar farseers, when pressed by inquisitorial interrogators during rare diplomatic encounters, have acknowledged that their own records speak of the hunger from beyond that consumed entire sectors during the height of their empire's expansion. These accounts, filtered through layers of Eldar mysticism and metaphor, describe worlds where psychically gifted populations simply vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty cities and the psychic echoes of mass terror. The Eldar texts suggest that enslavers were responsible for limiting the spread of several promising psychic species that might otherwise have challenged Eldar dominance during their Golden Age. The Necron's Silent King's archives, accessed through captured data crystals during the Damnos incident, contain references to what their translation protocols render as the Devourers of Thought. These records, dating from the final phases of the war in Heaven, describe enslaver swarms that followed in the wake of psychic weapons deployment, consuming the psychic fallout from battles between the Old Ones and their creations. The Necron perspective on enslavers is particularly chilling, as it suggests these entities were present and active during the galaxy's most ancient conflicts, feeding on the psychic carnage of that primordial war. Human archaeological expeditions have uncovered similar evidence on dozens of worlds throughout the Segmentum Solar and beyond. The ruins of the Cathurian Dominion, discovered during the early years of the Great Crusade, show clear signs of enslaver infestation dating back approximately 15,000 years before the current era. The Cathurians appear to have been a highly advanced human civilization that developed powerful psychic abilities through genetic manipulation and technological enhancement. Their cities bear the characteristic marks of enslaver occupation: crystalline growths that still emit low-level psychic resonance, architectural modifications that follow no human design principles, and vast underground complexes that seem designed for mass population control rather than habitation. The pattern of enslaver predation reveals itself through careful analysis of these archaeological sites. Initial infestation typically begins with the targeting of the most powerful psykers in a population, using them as anchor points to establish a foothold in real space. Once established, enslavers begin the systematic harvesting of psychic potential throughout the population, using their dominated hosts to expand their area of control. The process appears to be methodical and thorough, designed to extract maximum psychic energy while maintaining population stability for as long as possible. Physical evidence from these sites indicates that enslavers modify their host environments to better suit their needs. They appear to construct or grow specialized structures that amplify psychic resonance, creating feedback loops that increase the psychic output of their controlled populations. These modifications often involve the integration of warp-touched materials into existing architecture, creating hybrid structures that exist partially in both real space and the immaterium. The resulting constructions defy conventional physics and continue to emit dangerous levels of psychic energy long after the enslavers themselves have moved on. The temporal scope of enslaver activity becomes apparent when examining the geological record of affected worlds. Core samples from planets known to have experienced enslaver infestations show distinct isotopic signatures that correspond to periods of intense warp activity. These signatures appear in geological strata dating back millions of years, suggesting that enslavers have been active throughout the galaxy's history, rising and falling in cycles that correspond to the ebb and flow of galactic psychic development. Analysis of these geological markers reveals that enslaver activity tends to increase during periods of widespread psychic awakening and decrease during eras of psychic stagnation or suppression. This pattern suggests that enslavers are opportunistic predators that exploit periods of psychic abundance while remaining dormant during leaner times. The implications of this cyclical behavior are profound, as it suggests that the current era's increasing psychic activity may be drawing enslaver attention on a scale not seen since the height of the Eldar Empire. The relationship between enslavers and other warp entities remains poorly understood, but available evidence suggests complex interactions that go beyond simple competition for resources. Some imperial scholars theorize that enslavers may serve as a regulatory mechanism within the warp's ecosystem, preventing any single psychic species from achieving dominance over the immaterium. This theory gains support from observations that enslaver activity often increases in regions where demonic presence is weak, as if they fill ecological niches left vacant by the Chaos God's servants. The predatory efficiency of enslavers appears to have improved over the eons, suggesting either evolutionary adaptation or accumulated learning from previous infestations. Modern encounters with enslaver swarms show significantly more sophisticated tactics and coordination than those described in ancient records. They demonstrate an understanding of imperial military doctrine, Astartes' combat capabilities, and even the operational patterns of the Inquisition. This adaptability makes them increasingly dangerous opponents as they encounter and overcome each new defensive strategy developed against them. The physical manifestation of enslavers in real space presents one of the most disturbing sights recorded in imperial xenobiological archives. When these entities finally breach the barrier between the immaterium and material reality, they appear as grotesque amalgamations of organic and psychic matter that defy conventional biological classification. Their primary form resembles a massive jellyfish, with translucent, membranous bodies that pulse with sickly bioluminescent patterns. These patterns shift and flow across their surface like captured aurora, creating hypnotic displays that can entrance unprotected observers and leave them vulnerable to psychic domination. The translucent flesh of an enslaver reveals the horrifying internal structure beneath. Observers equipped with protective psychic wards report seeing networks of neural pathways that branch and twist throughout the creature's body like luminous veins. These pathways carry not blood or lymphatic fluid, but pure psychic energy harvested from their victims. The energy flows in visible currents, creating cascading waves of light that pulse in rhythm with the creature's alien heartbeat. The sight of this internal psychic circulation system has driven more than one imperial researcher to madness, as the human mind struggles to process the visual representation of raw warp energy flowing through living tissue. The bell-shaped main body of an enslaver can range from the size of a rhino transport to specimens that dwarf imperial titans. Larger specimens typically indicate more successful infestations, as enslavers appear to grow in proportion to the amount of psychic energy they have consumed. The surface of their bell bears distinctive scarification that resembles circuit patterns or neural networks, though these markings shift and change as the creature moves. These patterns serve as external indicators of the enslaver's psychic capacity and the complexity of its neural dominion network. Trailing beneath the main body, enslavers possess numerous tentacles that serve multiple functions in their predatory life cycle. These appendages vary in thickness from hair-thin filaments to massive muscular structures capable of crushing a space marine in Terminator armor. The smaller tentacles function as sensory organs, constantly tasting the psychic atmosphere for potential hosts. They can detect psychic emanations across vast distances, allowing enslavers to locate targets even when separated by multiple decks of ship armor or kilometers of solid rock. The larger tentacles serve as both weapons and tools for the physical manipulation of their environment and victims. The process of enslaver materialization represents perhaps the most traumatic aspect of their invasion methodology. Unlike demons, which tear through reality or exploit existing warp rifts, enslavers use living psykers as dimensional anchors. The process begins when an enslaver in the warp detects a suitable psychic signature and begins the slow process of establishing a connection. This initial contact phase can last anywhere from days to months, during which the target psyker experiences increasingly vivid nightmares, unexplained psychic phenomena, and gradual erosion of their mental defenses. During the connection phase, the targeted psyker begins to exhibit physical symptoms that trained observers can recognize as precursors to enslaver manifestation. Their eyes develop a distinctive milky film that reflects light in unnatural ways, creating the impression of looking into clouded water. Their skin takes on a translucent quality, particularly around the temples and forehead, where observers can sometimes see the shadow of alien neural structures beginning to form beneath the surface. The psykers' psychic abilities become erratic and unpredictable, often manifesting in ways that violate their normal patterns of power expression. The final manifestation occurs when the enslaver achieves sufficient psychic resonance with its chosen host to begin the physical transition. The psyker's cranium begins to expand and distort as the enslaver's essence pours through the dimensional barrier. Witnesses describe the horrifying sight of the victim's skull becoming translucent, revealing the writhing mass of the enslaver as it forces itself into real space through the inadequate confines of human anatomy. The process typically takes several hours, during which the psyker remains conscious and aware of what is happening to them, their screams serving as a psychic beacon that attracts other enslavers to the manifestation site. The biomechanical process of possession involves the enslaver establishing direct neural interface with its host's brain tissue. Rather than simply overwhelming the psyker's consciousness, enslavers employ a sophisticated method of neural integration that preserves the host's psychic abilities while subverting their will. The creature extends microscopic neural filaments throughout the host's brain, creating new pathways that bypass the normal decision-making centers of consciousness. These filaments are not merely parasitic, they actively enhance certain aspects of the host's neural function while suppressing others. The burrowing process begins at the moment of manifestation, with the enslaver's tentacles penetrating the host's cranium through the eye sockets, nasal cavity, and ear canals. The creature's anatomy allows it to compress and reshape itself to fit within the confines of the human skull, though this process invariably results in significant cranial expansion and distortion. X-ray analysis of possessed individuals reveals that the enslaver's neural mass replaces significant portions of the host's brain tissue, yet somehow maintains the psychic centers necessary for the creature's purposes. Once established within the cranium, the enslaver begins the process of neural mapping and integration. It sends exploratory filaments throughout the host's nervous system, cataloging neural pathways and identifying the specific structures responsible for psychic ability. The creature demonstrates an intuitive understanding of human neuroanatomy that suggests either evolutionary adaptation to human hosts or access to some form of genetic memory that encompasses multiple species' neural architectures. This process typically takes between 24 and 72 hours, during which the host experiences excruciating pain as their neural pathways are systematically invaded and modified. The establishment of neural dominance occurs through the creation of what imperial neurobiologists term override pathways. These artificial neural connections allow the enslaver to intercept and redirect the electrical impulses that control voluntary movement, speech, and conscious thought. The host's original personality and memories remain intact but become inaccessible, trapped within their own mind, while the enslaver operates their body like a sophisticated biological machine. This preservation of the original consciousness appears to be intentional, as the emotional distress of the trapped mind generates additional psychic energy that the enslaver can harvest. The transformation of possessed psykers into enslaved ones represents the complete subjugation of individual will to the collective consciousness of the enslaver hive mind. Unlike simple possession, which might allow for occasional resistance or moments of clarity, the enslaved ones exist in a state of absolute neural servitude. Their original personalities become background processes in their own minds, aware of their actions but powerless to influence them. This psychological torture generates a constant stream of psychic energy born from despair, terror, and helplessness that feeds directly into the enslaver's power reserves. The physical changes that accompany transformation into an enslaved one are both subtle and profound. The victim's eyes lose their original color, becoming uniformly pale and reflective. Their movements acquire an unnatural precision and coordination that betrays the alien intelligence controlling their actions. Most disturbing is the loss of individual mannerisms and personality quirks that make each human unique. Enslaved ones move and speak with identical patterns of behavior, their individual humanity subsumed into the collective will of their parasitic masters. The creation of a psychic hive mined through multiple enslaved ones demonstrates the sophisticated social organization of enslaver colonies. Each possessed individual becomes a node in a vast neural network that spans both real space and the warp. This network allows for instantaneous communication across vast distances and enables complex coordinated actions that would be impossible for individual operators. The hive mind appears to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, with different layers of consciousness handling various aspects of colony management, resource allocation, and strategic planning. The breeding cycle of enslavers reveals their true nature as parasitic organisms optimized for rapid expansion and resource exploitation. Unlike conventional biological reproduction, enslavers propagate through a process that combines psychic energy manipulation with the corruption of host biology. The cycle begins when a mature enslaver has accumulated sufficient psychic energy through the harvesting of multiple hosts. This energy is then concentrated and shaped into what imperial xenobiologists term psychic seeds, concentrated packets of enslaver consciousness that can exist independently in the warp until they locate suitable hosts. The reproductive process requires the sacrifice of multiple enslaved ones, whose bodies serve as incubators for the developing offspring. The parent enslaver channels accumulated psychic energy through its neural network, causing specific physiological changes in selected hosts. These chosen incubators undergo rapid cellular modification, their bodies becoming living wombs for the gestating enslaver larvae. The process is invariably fatal for the host, but the enslaver's neural control prevents them from dying until the reproduction cycle is complete. Enslaver larvae emerge from their hosts as miniature versions of the adult form, though they lack the full psychic capabilities of mature specimens. These juvenile enslavers must feed on psychic energy to develop their full abilities, creating a constant demand for fresh hosts. The larvae demonstrate remarkable adaptability, able to possess individuals with far weaker psychic abilities than those required by adult enslavers. This adaptation allows them to establish footholds in populations that might otherwise be resistant to enslaver infiltration. The establishment of infestation nodes represents the enslaver's method of creating permanent colonies in real space. These nodes typically center around locations with high psychic activity or strategic importance, such as psyker training facilities, astropathic relay stations, or worlds with naturally occurring psychic phenomena. The enslavers modify these locations through the introduction of warp-touched materials and the construction of psychic amplification devices created from the bodies and minds of their victims. Infestation nodes serve multiple functions within the enslaver colony structure. They act as communication hubs for the hive mind, allowing coordination between distant groups of enslaved ones. They also function as psychic batteries, storing excess energy harvested from victims for use during periods of scarcity or for powering major operations such as large-scale manifestations or breeding cycles. Most importantly, these nodes serve as dimensional anchors that stabilize the barrier between real space and the warp, making it easier for additional enslavers to manifest in the area. The construction of infestation nodes requires the systematic modification of both the physical environment and the local population. Enslaved ones work tirelessly to reshape their surroundings according to alien architectural principles that optimize psychic energy flow. Buildings are modified with crystalline growths that serve as psychic conductors, while underground chambers are excavated to house the specialized equipment needed for large-scale mind control operations. The local population is systematically processed, with the most psychically sensitive individuals being converted into enslaved ones, while others are maintained as a renewable resource for future harvesting. The cataclysmic conflict, known as the War in Heaven, created unprecedented psychic turbulence throughout the galaxy, tearing holes in reality itself as the Old Ones and their servants clashed against the star gods of the Necrons and their metallic legions. This primordial war, fought across millions of years when the galaxy was young and malleable, generated psychic shockwaves that rippled through both real space and the warp with devastating intensity. The massive deployment of psychic weaponry, the creation of entire species designed for warfare, and the systematic extermination of star systems created a psychic maelstrom that the enslavers found irresistible. Like scavengers drawn to a battlefield, these ancient predators emerged from the deepest reaches of the immaterium to feast upon the psychic carnage. The Old Ones, in their desperate struggle against the inexorable advance of Necron forces, had unleashed powers that fundamentally altered the fabric of reality itself. Their massive psychic manipulations created tiers in the barrier between dimensions that allowed warp entities unprecedented access to the material universe. The Enslavers, with their primordial understanding of dimensional boundaries and psychic resonance, recognized these breaches as opportunities for expansion on a galactic scale. Unlike the demons that would later exploit similar weaknesses, Enslavers required no summoning rituals or emotional resonance to manifest through these tiers. They simply followed the psychic emanations back to their source, emerging in real space wherever the Old Ones' weapons had left the dimensional barriers weakened. Archaeological evidence from Necron tomb worlds suggests that enslaver manifestations began appearing throughout contested sectors within centuries of the war's escalation. The Silent King's archives contain tactical assessments that describe entire Old One strongholds falling silent not due to Necron assault, but because of what their translation protocols render as the hunger that follows war. These records indicate that Necron commanders initially welcomed enslaver infestations as they weakened Old One resistance, though they would later come to understand the true scope of the threat these entities represented to all organic life. The Old One's strategy of creating psychically gifted servant races to fight their war provided the enslavers with an unprecedented abundance of suitable hosts. The Eldar, engineered for psychic sensitivity and longevity, represented ideal targets for enslaver possession. Their advanced neural architecture and natural warp attunement made them far more valuable as hosts than the crude psychic species that had previously attracted enslaver attention. Similarly, the Orcs, despite their relatively crude psychic abilities, possessed a collective psychic field that enslavers could exploit to establish massive hive mind networks spanning entire planetary populations. The Krork, the original template from which the Orcs devolved, presented an even more attractive target for enslaver predation. These sophisticated warrior organisms combined powerful individual psychic abilities with an innate understanding of technology that made them formidable opponents for Necron forces. However, their psychic nature also made them vulnerable to enslaver infiltration. Necron battle reports describe Krork strongholds that transformed overnight from centers of resistance into enslaver breeding grounds, their populations converted into enslaved ones that turned their advanced weaponry against their former allies. The proliferation of psychic species across the galaxy during the War in Heaven created what Imperial scholars have termed the Great Awakening, a period when psychic potential reached levels not seen before or since in galactic history. The Old One's desperate creation of new servant races, each designed with specific psychic capabilities to counter Necron advantages, resulted in thousands of worlds populated by beings whose minds blazed like beacons in the warp. This psychic abundance drew enslavers from across the galaxy, creating a secondary wave of invasion that followed in the wake of the primary conflict. The Jakaro, among the few surviving creations of the Old Ones, retain genetic memories of this period that manifest in their instinctive fear of certain psychic emanations. Their advanced digital weapons incorporate specific frequency modulators designed to disrupt enslaver neural networks, suggesting that their creators recognized the threat these entities posed and attempted to provide their servants with appropriate defenses. The fact that Jakaro still carry these genetic modifications millions of years later indicates the severity of the enslaver threat during the War in Heaven. Enslaver tactical doctrine during this period demonstrated remarkable adaptability to the changing conditions of galactic warfare. Rather than simply targeting isolated populations, as they had in previous epochs, they began coordinating their attacks to maximize the disruption of Old One military operations. Enslaver swarms would manifest in the aftermath of major battles, when psychic defenses were weakened and populations were traumatized by the horrors of war. They exploited the psychic wounds left by Necron weapons, using the dimensional instabilities as entry points to establish infestation nodes behind Old One lines. The systematic targeting of Old One command structures reveals the sophisticated intelligence gathering capabilities that enslavers developed during this period. They demonstrated an understanding of Old One military hierarchy and communication protocols that allowed them to identify and prioritize high-value targets. Psychically gifted Old One commanders and their most powerful servant species became primary objectives for enslaver infiltration, as their possession could cripple entire sectors of resistance against Necron forces. The creation of what Necron records term puppet sectors illustrates the scale of enslaver success during the War in Heaven. These were entire regions of space where Old One forces continued to operate according to established patterns, but were actually under complete enslaver control. The possessed populations maintained their military activities and even continued to engage Necron forces, but their strategic objectives had been subverted to serve enslaver expansion rather than Old One resistance. This deception allowed enslavers to establish vast breeding grounds while appearing to maintain the facade of continued Old One control. The impact of enslaver infestation on Old One logistics networks proved devastating to their war effort. The Old Ones relied heavily on psychic communication and transportation systems that required large numbers of psychically gifted operators. As enslavers systematically targeted these operators, converting them into enslaved ones, the Old Ones found themselves increasingly unable to coordinate their forces across the vast distances of galactic warfare. Supply lines collapsed, reinforcements failed to arrive at critical battles, and entire fleets found themselves stranded in hostile territory without psychic navigation support. The Old Ones' attempts to counter enslaver infiltration led to increasingly desperate measures that further weakened their position against Necron forces. They began implementing psychic screening protocols that required enormous resources to maintain, diverting psychically gifted individuals from combat roles to internal security operations. The creation of specialized anti-enslaver weapons required the sacrifice of entire worlds to power the massive psychic constructs needed to drive the entities back into the warp. These defensive measures, while occasionally successful, consumed resources and personnel that the Old Ones could ill afford to spare from their primary conflict with the Necrons. The relationship between Catan and enslavers during this period reveals the complex dynamics of the war in Heaven's final phases. The Star Gods, with their fundamental hatred of warp entities and all things psychic, recognized enslavers as a threat that transcended the immediate conflict with the Old Ones. Unlike the Necrons, who initially viewed enslaver infestations as beneficial to their cause, the Catan understood that these entities posed a long-term threat to all forms of organized civilization. Their consciousness, existing partially outside normal space-time, allowed them to perceive the true scope of enslaver expansion and the ultimate consequences of allowing these entities to establish permanent footholds in real space. The Void Dragon, before its imprisonment on Mars, directed specific Necron forces to engage enslaver concentrations, even when doing so provided no immediate tactical advantage against Old One positions. These operations, initially questioned by Necron commanders as wasteful diversions from the primary war effort, represented the Catan's understanding that enslavers posed an existential threat to their long-term plans for galactic domination. The Star God's vision of a galaxy populated by immortal mechanical servants would be impossible to achieve if enslavers consumed all psychic life before the Necrons could complete their harvest of organic civilizations. The Nightbringers' campaigns against enslaver-controlled worlds during the war's final centuries demonstrate the Catan's growing awareness of the threat these entities represented. Unlike typical Necron operations, which focused on the systematic extermination of organic life, these campaigns employed specialized weapons designed specifically to sever the connection between enslaver consciousness and their hosts. The technology required for these operations represented a significant diversion of Catan attention and resources from the primary conflict, indicating the priority they placed on containing enslaver expansion. The development of anti-psychic technologies by Necron forces during this period reflects Catan influence on their strategic priorities. Weapons that could disrupt psychic fields and sever warp connections became standard equipment for Necron units operating in sectors with known enslaver activity. The famous gloom prisms that crown many Necron vehicles trace their origins to this period, when the need to combat enslaver influence drove rapid innovation in anti-psychic warfare. These technologies would later prove crucial in the Catan's own enslavement by their Necron servants, though that irony would not become apparent until millions of years later. The systematic documentation of enslaver behavior patterns by Necron forces provides the most comprehensive records of these entities' capabilities during their period of greatest expansion. Unlike organic species, which typically succumb to enslaver domination before they could compile useful intelligence, Necron observers remained immune to psychic influence and could study enslaver operations with scientific detachment. Their reports describe breeding cycles that could produce thousands of offspring from a single mature specimen, infestation techniques that could convert entire planetary populations within standard years, and hive mind coordination that spanned multiple star systems. The emergence of hybrid Old One enslaver technologies during the war's final phases represents perhaps the most disturbing development of this period. Some Old One enclaves, faced with imminent destruction by Necron forces, attempted to harness enslaver capabilities for their own purposes. These experiments in controlled parasitism resulted in weapons that combined Old One psychic mastery with enslaver neural domination techniques. The resulting constructs could override the consciousness of enemy forces, turning Necron warriors against their own commanders and creating chaos within previously disciplined military formations. The failure of these hybrid technologies ultimately contributed to the Old One's final defeat, as the enslavers proved impossible to control once they had established footholds within Old One research facilities. The entities systematically subverted the scientists and technicians working on these projects, using their knowledge of Old One technology to enhance their own capabilities. Facilities that had been intended to produce weapons against the Necrons instead became breeding grounds for enhanced enslaver variants that possessed unprecedented understanding of advanced technology and military tactics. The collapse of Old One civilization during the war in Heaven's final phases occurred not through a single decisive defeat, but through the systematic erosion of their power base by multiple threats operating simultaneously. While Necron forces pressed their advantage on traditional battlefields, enslavers consumed the psychic infrastructure that supported Old One military operations. The combination of external pressure from Necron armies and internal subversion by enslaver infiltration created a cascade failure that no amount of Old One technological superiority could overcome. The final Old One strongholds fell not to Necron assault, but to internal collapse as enslaver infestations reached critical mass within their populations. Worlds that had resisted Necron siege for centuries succumbed within months, once enslavers established breeding colonies within their psychic defense networks. The Old One's greatest strength, their mastery of psychic power, became their fatal weakness as enslavers exploited the very abilities that had made them masters of the galaxy. The catastrophic psychic awakening that swept through human space during the 25th through 30th millennia created conditions that proved irresistible to enslaver predators lurking in the deepest reaches of the warp. This period, known to imperial historians as the Age of Strife, witnessed humanity's first widespread emergence of psychic abilities, coinciding with the birth pangs of Slaanesh in the Eldar Empire's death throes. The psychic turbulence generated by millions of human minds suddenly blazing with untrained power created a beacon that drew enslaver attention across vast distances within the Immaterium. What began as isolated manifestations on frontier worlds rapidly escalated into a plague of possession that consumed entire sectors of human space. The initial outbreaks occurred on worlds where human populations had achieved the highest concentrations of psychic talent through genetic manipulation or natural evolution. The Terran Federation's advanced colonies, particularly those involved in psychic research programs during the Dark Age of technology, became primary targets for enslaver infiltration. These worlds possessed sophisticated populations with powerful but largely untrained psychic abilities, making them ideal breeding grounds for entities that required psychic energy to sustain their manifestation in real space. The irony was not lost on later imperial scholars that humanity's greatest achievements in psychic development became the very vulnerabilities that enslavers exploited most effectively. The Cathurian Dominion, a confederation of 12 worlds in what would later become the Segmentum Solar, experienced the first documented large-scale enslaver infestation of the Age of Strife. Archaeological evidence recovered during the Great Crusade reveals that the Cathurians had developed psychic abilities through careful genetic engineering, creating a population where nearly 40% possessed some degree of psychic sensitivity. Their capital world of Kythera Prime maintained detailed records of the infestation's progression, documents that survived in crystalline storage matrices deep beneath the planet's surface. The Cathurian records describe the initial phase of enslaver infiltration as a period of increasing psychic instability among their most gifted individuals. Prominent psychic researchers and government officials began experiencing shared nightmares featuring vast jellyfish-like entities drifting through spaces that existed between thoughts. These visions, initially dismissed as stress-related phenomena or side effects of experimental psychic enhancement procedures, gradually became more vivid and intrusive. Within 6 months of the first recorded incidents, affected individuals began exhibiting the telltale signs of enslaver possession: translucent skin, milky eyes, and the gradual loss of individual personality traits. The transformation of Kythera Prime's population proceeded with methodical efficiency that demonstrated sophisticated enslaver planning and coordination. Rather than manifesting randomly throughout the population, the entities systematically targeted key infrastructure personnel first. Psychic communication operators, transportation coordinators, and military commanders found themselves possessed before lower priority civilians, ensuring that the planet's defensive capabilities were compromised before the general population became aware of the threat. This tactical approach allowed enslavers to establish complete control over planetary communications and prevent distress signals from reaching other worlds in the Dominion. The construction of infestation nodes across Kythera Prime followed architectural principles that violated human understanding of physics and engineering. Enslaved construction crews, working with inhuman coordination and endurance, erected crystalline spires that served as psychic amplification devices. These structures, composed of materials that existed partially in both real space and the warp, created a planetary network that enhanced the enslavers' ability to maintain control over their growing population of hosts. The spires generated a constant low-frequency, psychic hum that prevented uncontrolled humans from mounting effective resistance while simultaneously attracting additional enslavers from the warp. The spread of infestation throughout the Cathurian Dominion demonstrated the enslavers' ability to coordinate operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Within 2 years of the initial outbreak on Kythera Prime, similar manifestations began appearing on the Dominion's other worlds. The pattern remained consistent: targeting of psychically gifted individuals, systematic subversion of planetary infrastructure, and the construction of amplification networks that transformed entire worlds into breeding grounds for additional enslaver spawn. The Dominion's advanced transportation network, which relied heavily on psychic navigation and communication, became a vector for spreading the infestation rather than a means of coordinating defense. The final collapse of the Cathurian Dominion occurred when enslaver-controlled fleets began attacking worlds that had not yet fallen to infestation. These assaults differed markedly from conventional military operations, as the attackers showed no interest in territorial conquest or resource extraction. Instead, they focused exclusively on capturing psychically sensitive individuals while systematically exterminating those with little or no psychic potential. The efficiency of these operations suggested that enslavers possessed detailed intelligence about the psychic capabilities of target populations, information they could only have obtained through extensive infiltration and surveillance operations. Similar patterns of infestation emerged across human space as the age of strife progressed and psychic awakening accelerated. The Moravian League, a collection of mining worlds in the galactic north, fell to enslaver swarms that exploited the psychic abilities of their worker populations. These worlds had developed limited psychic talents as an adaptation to the dangerous working conditions in their deep core mining operations, where conventional communication methods proved inadequate. The miners' ability to sense danger and coordinate through psychic impressions made them valuable to the mining corporations, but also made them ideal targets for enslaver possession. The Moravian infestation displayed characteristics that would become typical of enslaver operations during this period. The entities showed remarkable patience in establishing their presence, sometimes taking decades to fully manifest while they slowly expanded their influence through the mining communities. They exploited the tight-knit social structures of mining crews, using possessed individuals to recruit their colleagues and family members into the growing network of enslaved ones. The hierarchical nature of mining operations provided ready-made command structures that enslavers could subvert and use to maintain order among their controlled populations. The transformation of mining worlds into enslaver breeding colonies required significant modifications to existing infrastructure. The entities repurposed mining equipment to excavate vast underground complexes that served as nurseries for their offspring. These facilities, carved from solid rock using mining lasers operated by enslaved workers, created environments that existed partially in the warp while remaining anchored in real space. The resulting chambers defied conventional physics, with walls that seemed to extend infinitely in directions that had no names in human geometry. The Terran Federation's attempts to contain enslaver outbreaks during the early phases of the Age of Strife revealed the inadequacy of conventional military responses to this type of threat. Federal forces dispatched to investigate communication blackouts from affected worlds often found themselves facing populations that appeared normal but behaved with unsettling uniformity. Initial contact protocols, designed for dealing with rebellious colonies or Xenos threats, proved completely inappropriate when confronting entire populations under alien mental control. The Battle of Sigma Draconis demonstrated the futility of traditional military tactics against enslaver-controlled forces. A federal battle group arrived at the system to find the local defense fleet operating normally, but refusing to respond to standard communication protocols. When federal forces attempted to board the defending vessels, they discovered crews that moved and fought with perfect coordination, but showed no individual initiative or personality. The boarding actions became nightmarish affairs as federal troops found themselves fighting opponents who felt no pain, showed no fear, and coordinated their actions with inhuman precision. The most disturbing aspect of the Sigma Draconis engagement was the gradual conversion of federal personnel during the extended battle. Troops who suffered injuries from enslaved defenders began exhibiting signs of possession within hours of contact. The alien neural filaments that comprised enslaver physiology could apparently transmit through direct physical contact, allowing the entities to expand their influence even during active combat operations. Federal commanders found themselves forced to quarantine their own wounded, creating impossible tactical situations where victory became meaningless if it resulted in the corruption of their forces. The development of specialized anti-enslaver protocols by surviving federal military units represented humanity's first systematic attempt to combat these entities. These protocols, developed through bitter experience and enormous casualties, emphasized the importance of avoiding direct contact with suspected enslaved populations. Federal forces learned to use long-range bombardment and automated weapon systems to engage enslaver-controlled forces, minimizing the risk of personnel conversion during combat operations. The creation of dead zones throughout human space resulted from the systematic failure of containment efforts and the exponential spread of enslaver infestations. These regions, encompassing hundreds of star systems, became areas where no human vessel could safely travel without risking conversion of their crews. The loss of these territories fragmented human civilization, isolating individual worlds and preventing the coordination necessary for effective resistance. Trade routes that had connected human worlds for millennia became death traps, where merchant vessels disappeared without trace, their crews added to the growing armies of enslaved ones. The psychological impact of enslaver infestations on unaffected human populations proved almost as devastating as the physical threat itself. Worlds that had maintained contact with affected systems through astropathic communication reported receiving increasingly disturbing messages before contact was lost entirely. These final transmissions, analyzed by federal intelligence services, revealed the gradual erosion of individual personality among the senders. Messages that began with normal requests for assistance gradually became uniform reports delivered in identical phrasing, suggesting that the original astropaths had been replaced by enslaved ones mimicking normal communication patterns. The isolation of human worlds during the Age of Strife created conditions that made enslaver infiltration even more effective. Planets that had lost contact with the broader human community became increasingly paranoid and insular, making them less likely to recognize the signs of enslaver infiltration until it was too late. The entities exploited this isolation by manifesting slowly and carefully, taking years or even decades to establish complete control over planetary populations. By the time neighboring worlds realized what had happened, the affected planets had become fully operational enslaver breeding colonies. The birth of Slaanesh during the final centuries of the Age of Strife created additional complications for human worlds already struggling against enslaver infiltration. The psychic shockwave generated by the new Chaos God's emergence in the warp disrupted existing psychic phenomena throughout the galaxy, including the neural networks that enslavers used to maintain control over their host populations. Some worlds experienced temporary liberation as enslaver control systems collapsed under the psychic turbulence, but these respites proved brief as the entities quickly adapted to the changed conditions in the warp. The emergence of the Emperor's forces during the unification wars on Terra marked the beginning of humanity's first effective response to the enslaver threat. The Emperor's understanding of psychic phenomena and warp entities allowed him to develop strategies and technologies specifically designed to combat these ancient predators. The Thunder Warriors, enhanced with psychic resistance modifications, proved capable of engaging enslaved forces without succumbing to conversion during combat operations. The Great Crusade's encounter with enslaver-infested worlds required the development of entirely new military doctrines and specialized equipment. Imperial forces learned to identify the signs of enslaver presence from orbital reconnaissance, looking for the characteristic crystalline structures and architectural modifications that marked infestation sites. The discovery of these indicators triggered specific protocols that emphasized long-range engagement and the complete sterilization of affected areas. The purification of Kithara Prime during the early years of the Great Crusade demonstrated the Emperor's systematic approach to dealing with enslaver infestations. Rather than attempting to liberate the enslaved population, Imperial forces employed cyclonic torpedoes to eliminate the planetary biosphere entirely. This extreme measure, while ensuring the complete destruction of the enslaver colony, also represented the loss of valuable archaeological sites and potential intelligence about enslaver capabilities and weaknesses. The development of anti-psychic warfare techniques by Imperial forces drew heavily on knowledge recovered from Dark Age of technology archives and the Emperor's personal understanding of warp phenomena. Specialized weapons that could disrupt psychic fields and sever the connection between enslaver consciousness and their hosts became standard equipment for Astartes forces operating in sectors with known infestation risks. The effectiveness of these weapons varied considerably depending on the maturity and strength of individual enslaver specimens, with older and more powerful entities proving remarkably resistant to conventional anti-psychic attacks. The establishment of quarantine protocols for worlds suspected of enslaver infiltration became a cornerstone of imperial expansion strategy during the Great Crusade. These protocols required extensive orbital reconnaissance and the deployment of specialized detection equipment before any imperial personnel were permitted to make planetfall. The discovery of enslaver presence triggered immediate implementation of exterminatus protocols, reflecting the imperial understanding that these entities posed an existential threat to human civilization that justified the most extreme responses. The systematic methodology employed by enslavers in their conquest of psychically active populations follows a predictable pattern that has remained consistent across millennia of observation. This operational framework, refined through countless successful infestations, demonstrates the sophisticated intelligence behind what might otherwise appear to be simple predatory behavior. Imperial xenobiologists and Ordo Malleus specialists who have studied recovered data from affected worlds have identified 4 distinct phases in the enslaver infestation cycle, each building upon the previous stage to create an inexorable progression from initial contact to complete planetary domination. The initial infiltration phase begins long before any physical manifestation occurs in real space. Enslavers possess an extraordinary ability to detect psychic emanations across vast distances within the warp, using these signatures as navigation beacons to locate potential target populations. Their sensory apparatus, evolved over millions of years of predation, can distinguish between different types of psychic activity and assess the relative strength and training level of individual psykers from distances that span multiple star systems. This long-range detection capability allows them to identify and prioritize targets based on the psychic potential of entire populations rather than individual specimens. The process of psychic reconnaissance involves the projection of microscopic portions of enslaver consciousness through the warp to conduct detailed surveys of target populations. These reconnaissance probes, invisible to conventional detection methods and barely perceptible even to trained psykers, infiltrate the psychic atmosphere surrounding inhabited worlds. They catalog the number and strength of psychically active individuals, map the social and political structures that govern these populations, and identify key infrastructure that relies on psychic abilities for operation. This intelligence-gathering phase can continue for years or even decades before the enslavers commit to a full-scale infiltration attempt. The targeting criteria employed by enslavers reveal their sophisticated understanding of population dynamics and resource management. They show a marked preference for worlds with high concentrations of trained psykers, particularly those involved in communication, transportation, or military operations. Astropathic relay stations, navigator houses, and psyker training facilities represent priority targets because their personnel possess both the psychic strength necessary for effective possession and the institutional knowledge required to maintain complex operations under alien control. The entities demonstrate remarkable patience in waiting for optimal conditions, sometimes monitoring target populations for generations before initiating contact. The establishment of initial contact between enslaver consciousness and selected target psykers represents the most crucial phase of the infiltration process. Rather than attempting to overwhelm their victims through brute psychic force, enslavers employ subtle manipulation techniques that gradually erode mental defenses over extended periods. The process typically begins with the implantation of alien thoughts and images during the target's sleep cycle, when natural psychic barriers are at their weakest. These nocturnal intrusions start as vague impressions and disturbing dreams, but gradually increase in intensity and clarity as the enslaver establishes stronger psychic resonance with its chosen host. The psychological profile of individuals most susceptible to enslaver infiltration shows consistent patterns across multiple documented cases. Psykers who have experienced recent trauma undergone intensive psychic training, or been exposed to warp phenomena display increased vulnerability to alien mental influence. The entities appear to exploit existing psychological weaknesses and emotional instabilities, using these vulnerabilities as entry points for their consciousness. Individuals with strong psychic abilities but limited training in mental defense techniques represent ideal targets, as they possess the power necessary for manifestation but lack the discipline to resist alien intrusion. The gradual erosion of mental barriers during the infiltration phase follows a predictable progression that trained observers can learn to recognize. Target individuals begin experiencing memory gaps and periods of lost time, during which the enslaver consciousness experiments with controlling their host's body. These episodes initially last only minutes, but gradually extend to hours as the alien presence strengthens its hold. The psyker's personality begins to shift subtly, with friends and colleagues noting changes in speech patterns, behavioral preferences, and emotional responses that seem inconsistent with their established character. Physical symptoms accompanying enslaver infiltration provide additional warning signs for those trained to recognize them. The target's eyes develop a distinctive glassy appearance, with pupils that respond abnormally to light and seem to track movement that others cannot perceive. Their skin takes on a translucent quality, particularly around the temples and forehead, where careful observation can sometimes reveal the shadow of alien neural structures beginning to form beneath the surface. These physical changes progress slowly enough that they often go unnoticed by casual observers, allowing the infiltration to proceed undetected until it reaches critical stages. The establishment of beachheads through the possession of key psykers represents the transition from covert infiltration to active infestation. Once enslavers have successfully established control over their initial targets, they begin the systematic expansion of their influence through the careful selection and conversion of additional hosts. This process demonstrates remarkable strategic thinking, as the entities prioritize targets based on their potential to facilitate further expansion rather than simply selecting the most powerful psykers available. Military commanders, government officials, and infrastructure operators receive priority attention because their positions provide access to resources and personnel that can accelerate the infestation process. The conversion of authority figures creates cascading effects throughout the target population that the enslavers exploit with ruthless efficiency. A possessed military commander can reassign personnel to facilitate the capture of additional psykers, while an infiltrated government official can modify security protocols to prevent the detection of alien activity. The entities demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human organizational structures, using their knowledge to identify and exploit the chain of command relationships that govern military and civilian institutions. This institutional knowledge appears to be acquired through the memories and experiences of their hosts, suggesting that enslavers can access and process human cognitive patterns with remarkable thoroughness. The selection of secondary targets follows criteria that maximize the expansion potential of the growing infestation network. Enslavers show particular interest in psykers who maintain regular contact with off-world personnel, as these individuals provide opportunities to spread the infestation beyond the initial target population. Astropaths, Vox operators, and transportation coordinators become priority targets because their professional duties require them to interact with personnel from other worlds and installations. The entities demonstrate patience in cultivating these connections, sometimes maintaining normal operational patterns for months while they position themselves to exploit interplanetary communication and transportation networks. The construction of neural interface networks among possessed individuals represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of enslaver methodology. Rather than operating as independent agents, enslaved ones become nodes in a vast psychic network that allows for instantaneous communication and coordination across vast distances. This hive mind structure operates on multiple levels simultaneously, with different layers of consciousness handling various aspects of colony management, resource allocation, and strategic planning. The network's complexity increases exponentially with each new addition, creating emergent capabilities that exceed the sum of individual components. The exponential expansion phase begins when enslavers have established sufficient control over key personnel to begin large-scale conversion operations. This phase is characterized by a dramatic acceleration in the rate of new possessions, as the entities leverage their growing network of enslaved ones to capture and process additional psykers. The systematic nature of this expansion demonstrates careful planning and resource management, with different groups of possessed individuals assigned specific roles in the capture, transport, and conversion of new hosts. The efficiency of these operations increases dramatically as the infestation network grows, creating a feedback loop that drives exponential growth in the enslaver population. The development of specialized conversion facilities represents a significant evolution in enslaver methodology compared to their ancient predatory patterns. Rather than simply possessing individuals wherever they encounter them, modern enslaver infestations involve the construction of dedicated processing centers where captured psykers undergo systematic conversion. These facilities, typically established in secure locations with limited access, allow for the careful management of the possession process and the optimization of host compatibility. The entities demonstrate remarkable adaptability in repurposing existing structures for these purposes, converting everything from medical facilities to industrial complexes into conversion centers. The processing of captured psykers within these facilities follows standardized procedures that maximize success rates while minimizing resource expenditure. Subjects undergo psychological conditioning designed to weaken their mental defenses and prepare them for alien possession. This conditioning involves exposure to psychic emanations that disrupt normal thought patterns and create states of heightened suggestibility. The process typically takes several days to complete, during which the subject experiences a gradual dissolution of individual identity and increasing susceptibility to external mental influence. The physical aspects of the conversion process involve the surgical implantation of enslaver neural filaments into the subject's brain tissue. These procedures, performed by possessed medical personnel with inhuman precision, require the careful mapping of neural pathways to ensure optimal integration between alien and human consciousness. The operations are conducted without anesthesia, as the subject's pain responses provide valuable feedback about the success of the neural integration process. The resulting hybrid consciousness retains access to the host's memories and skills while operating under complete enslaver control. The cascading network effects created by exponential expansion allow enslavers to achieve planetary dominance with remarkable speed once they reach critical mass. The growing population of enslaved ones provides increasing resources for the capture and conversion of additional hosts, while the expanding neural network enhances coordination and operational efficiency. This positive feedback loop can transform a limited infestation into planetary conquest within months once the expansion phase reaches full momentum. The mathematical progression of this growth pattern makes early detection and intervention crucial for preventing complete population conversion. The coordination of multiple conversion operations across different geographic regions demonstrates the sophisticated command and control capabilities of mature enslaver networks. Rather than expanding randomly from initial infestation sites, the entities establish multiple conversion centers that operate simultaneously across the target world. This distributed approach prevents the concentration of resistance forces and ensures that the infestation continues even if individual facilities are discovered and destroyed. The level of coordination required for these operations indicates a central intelligence that can process vast amounts of information and make strategic decisions in real time. The final domination stage represents the culmination of the infestation cycle, when enslaver control extends throughout the entire planetary population and the world becomes fully integrated into their expanding empire. This phase is characterized by the systematic transformation of planetary infrastructure to serve enslaver needs and the establishment of breeding facilities for the production of new enslaver offspring. The original population, now completely converted to enslaved ones, becomes a renewable resource for psychic energy harvesting and a workforce for the construction of facilities needed for further expansion. The architectural modifications implemented during the domination stage follow alien design principles that optimize psychic energy flow and facilitate large-scale population control. Existing structures undergo radical transformation as enslaved construction crews install crystalline components that serve as psychic amplifiers and neural network nodes. These modifications create a planetary infrastructure that exists partially in both real space and the warp, allowing for enhanced communication between different enslaver colonies and improved efficiency in psychic energy harvesting operations. The establishment of breeding colonies represents the ultimate purpose of enslaver expansion, transforming conquered worlds into production centers for new generations of these ancient predators. The breeding process requires the systematic sacrifice of large numbers of enslaved ones, whose bodies serve as incubators for developing enslaver larvae. These facilities, constructed in the deepest levels of converted cities, create environments that replicate the conditions found in the deepest reaches of the warp. The resulting offspring emerge with enhanced capabilities compared to their predecessors, incorporating genetic and psychic adaptations derived from their host species. The transformation of conquered worlds into staging areas for further expansion demonstrates the long-term strategic thinking that drives enslaver operations. Rather than simply consuming available resources and moving on, the entities invest considerable effort in establishing permanent bases that can support ongoing expansion efforts. These worlds become launching points for new infestations, with their populations of enslaved ones serving as crews for invasion fleets, and their industrial capacity converted to produce the specialized equipment needed for large-scale possession operations. The integration of multiple conquered worlds into a coherent enslaver empire reveals the true scope of their ambitions and capabilities. The neural networks that connect individual planets create a galactic-scale hive mind that can coordinate operations across vast distances and time scales. This distributed intelligence system allows for the simultaneous management of multiple infestation campaigns while maintaining the infrastructure needed to support continued expansion. The resulting empire operates with efficiency and coordination that surpasses most organic civilizations, making it a formidable opponent for any force that attempts to resist its expansion. The systematic threat posed by enslaver infestations demanded equally systematic responses from imperial institutions, leading to the development of specialized protocols that would define humanity's approach to combating these ancient predators for millennia to come. The Ordo Malleus, drawing upon hard-won experience from encounters during the Great Crusade and subsequent conflicts, established a comprehensive classification system that categorizes enslaver threats according to their scope, maturity, and potential for expansion. This taxonomic approach allows imperial forces to deploy appropriate countermeasures while avoiding the catastrophic resource expenditure that characterized early attempts to combat these entities through conventional military means. The Ordo Malleus classification system divides enslaver threats into 5 distinct categories, each requiring specific response protocols tailored to the unique characteristics of different infestation stages. Designatus Alpha represents initial infiltration attempts where fewer than 10 individuals show signs of possession, typically characterized by isolated incidents of psychic disturbance and behavioral anomalies among psyker populations. These early-stage infestations remain vulnerable to targeted intervention, provided imperial forces can identify and contain affected individuals before the entities establish stable neural networks. The protocol for alpha-level threats emphasizes rapid response and surgical precision, deploying specialized inquisitorial teams equipped with anti-psychic weaponry and psychic nullification devices. Designatus Beta classifications apply to established infestations where enslavers have successfully possessed between 10 and 100 individuals, indicating the presence of functional neural networks and active conversion operations. Beta-level threats require significantly more resources to contain, as the entities typically possess sufficient coordination capabilities to mount organized resistance against Imperial intervention forces. The interconnected nature of possessed individuals at this stage makes selective elimination extremely difficult, often requiring the deployment of entire companies of specialized troops equipped with area effect psychic disruptors and heavy flamers designed to prevent the spread of neural filaments through direct contact. The escalation to designatus gamma status occurs when infestation networks exceed 100 possessed individuals and begin demonstrating coordinated strategic behavior across multiple geographic locations. Gamma-level threats represent the threshold beyond which conventional containment becomes extremely difficult, as the enslaver hive mind achieves sufficient complexity to adapt its tactics in real time and coordinate multiple simultaneous operations. Imperial response protocols for gamma classifications typically involve the deployment of full Astartes strike forces supported by specialized ordo-malleus assets, including Grey Knight's Terminators equipped with psychic hoods and force weapons specifically consecrated for anti-enslaver operations. Designatus Delta represents planetary-scale infestations, where enslaver control extends throughout major population centers and critical infrastructure systems. Delta-level threats indicate that the entities have achieved sufficient penetration of planetary command structures to compromise defensive capabilities and potentially spread the infestation to off-world targets through normal transportation and communication channels. The protocols for Delta classifications acknowledge that surgical intervention is no longer viable, instead focusing on containment and quarantine measures designed to prevent the spread of infestation to neighboring systems while preparing for potential exterminatus operations. The most severe classification, Designatus Omega, applies to multiplanetary infestations where enslaver networks span entire star systems and demonstrate the capability for independent expansion operations. Omega-level threats represent existential dangers to entire sectors, requiring coordinated responses from multiple Imperial institutions and the potential deployment of entire Space Marine chapters. The protocols governing Omega classifications grant Inquisitors extraordinary authority to requisition resources and implement extreme measures, including the systematic sterilization of entire star systems to prevent further enslaver expansion. The development of specific identification protocols reflects decades of bitter experience with enslaver infiltration techniques and the entity's sophisticated methods of concealing their presence within human populations. Imperial forces learned through costly failures that conventional interrogation methods prove ineffective against possessed individuals, as enslavers can perfectly mimic the speech patterns, memories, and behavioral quirks of their hosts. The entity's access to their victims' complete psychological profiles makes traditional verification procedures useless, requiring the development of specialized detection techniques based on psychic resonance patterns rather than behavioral analysis. The Psychic Resonance Detection Array, developed by the Adeptus Mechanicus in collaboration with ordo-malleus specialists, represents the primary tool for identifying enslaver infiltration in its early stages. These devices measure the subtle fluctuations in local psychic fields that occur when alien consciousness interfaces with human neural patterns. The technology requires extensive calibration for each deployment, as background psychic activity varies significantly between different worlds and populations. Trained operators can distinguish between normal psychic emanations and the distinctive harmonic distortions created by enslaver neural networks, though the process requires considerable expertise and specialized equipment. The implementation of mandatory psychic screening protocols for high-risk populations reflects the Imperial understanding that prevention remains far more effective than treatment when dealing with enslaver threats. Personnel assigned to critical positions within astropathic facilities, navigator houses, and psyker training institutions undergo regular screening using portable resonance detectors and standardized psychic probe techniques. These examinations focus on detecting the early warning signs of alien mental influence, including subtle changes in psychic signature patterns and the presence of foreign neural pathways within the subject's consciousness. The development of psychic isolation chambers represents one of the most significant advances in enslaver containment technology. These specialized facilities, constructed with psychically inert materials and equipped with powerful null field generators, create environments where possessed individuals cannot maintain contact with the broader enslaver hive mind. The isolation disrupts the neural networks that allow enslavers to coordinate their activities and share information between different hosts, effectively reducing possessed individuals to isolated nodes that can be studied and potentially neutralized without risking further contamination. The standardization of containment procedures across imperial institutions ensures consistent responses to enslaver threats regardless of which organization first encounters the infestation. These protocols emphasize the importance of immediate isolation and the prevention of physical contact between suspected possessed individuals and uncontaminated personnel. The procedures specify the use of servo skulls and automated systems for initial assessment and containment, minimizing human exposure to potential neural filament transmission. Specialized hazmat suits equipped with psychic shielding provide additional protection for personnel who must work in close proximity to confirmed enslaver infestations. The Grey Knight's role in combating enslaver incursions stems from their unique combination of psychic abilities and incorruptible nature, making them ideally suited for operations against entities that exploit psychic vulnerabilities in conventional forces. Their extensive training in anti-demonic warfare translates effectively to enslaver combat, though the specific nature of these ancient predators requires specialized tactics and equipment modifications. The chapter's librarians have developed specific psychic disciplines designed to disrupt enslaver neural networks and sever the connections between possessed individuals and their alien masters. The deployment of Grey Knights against confirmed enslaver infestations follows carefully established tactical doctrines that emphasize rapid strike capabilities and the systematic elimination of infestation nodes. Terminator squads equipped with specialized force weapons lead the assault, using their psychic abilities to identify and prioritize targets based on their position within the enslaver neural network. The chapter's understanding of warp phenomena allows them to distinguish between primary nodes that coordinate network activity and secondary nodes that serve support functions, enabling more efficient allocation of resources during combat operations. The modification of Grey Knight's equipment for anti-enslaver operations involves the integration of psychic nullification devices with their standard weapon systems. Force weapons receive additional consecration rituals that enhance their effectiveness against alien psychic entities, while their power armor incorporates specialized psychic dampening fields that prevent neural filament transmission through direct contact. The chapter's dreadnoughts undergo significant modifications, with their sarcophagi equipped with enhanced psychic shielding that protects the entombed battle brothers from enslaver mental intrusion attempts. The tactical approach employed by Grey Knights in enslaver combat zones emphasizes the importance of maintaining psychic discipline and avoiding prolonged exposure to possessed populations. Strike teams operate in carefully coordinated formations that maximize their collective psychic resistance while providing mutual support against enslaver counterattacks. The chapter's experience with demonic entities provides valuable insights into the behavior patterns of warp-based predators, though enslavers' focus on domination rather than corruption requires different tactical considerations and engagement protocols. The development of specialized ammunition for use against enslaver infestations represents a collaborative effort between the Grey Knights Tech Marines and Adeptus Mechanicus researchers. These rounds incorporate blessed silver components and psychically charged materials that disrupt the neural filaments connecting enslaver consciousness to their hosts. The ammunition proves particularly effective against recently possessed individuals, where the alien neural integration remains incomplete and vulnerable to disruption. However, mature possessions with fully established neural networks require more direct intervention through close combat with consecrated force weapons. The establishment of Grey Knight's rapid response protocols ensures that confirmed enslaver threats receive immediate attention from specialized anti-psychic forces. The chapter maintains strike cruisers positioned throughout key sectors, ready to deploy to crisis zones within standard hours of receiving distress signals. These vessels carry specialized equipment for enslaver combat operations, including portable psychic isolation chambers and field-deployable null field generators that can establish temporary containment zones around infestation sites. The Adeptus Munitorum's guidelines for planetary evacuation in the face of enslaver threats reflect the grim reality that conventional military forces cannot effectively combat these entities once they achieve significant penetration of local populations. The evacuation protocols prioritize the removal of uncontaminated psykers and essential personnel while implementing strict quarantine procedures to prevent the spread of infestation to evacuation vessels. The guidelines acknowledge that evacuation operations themselves present significant risks, as possessed individuals may attempt to infiltrate evacuation convoys and spread the infestation to new locations. The implementation of evacuation procedures requires careful coordination between multiple imperial institutions, with the Adeptus Munitorum providing logistical support while inquisitorial forces maintain security and screening operations. Transport vessels undergo extensive psychic screening before departure, with all personnel subjected to resonance detection scans and behavioral assessment protocols. The evacuation fleet maintains strict communication protocols designed to prevent possessed individuals from coordinating their activities across multiple vessels or transmitting intelligence about imperial defensive measures to the broader enslaver network. The establishment of refugee processing centers on secure worlds provides temporary accommodation for evacuated populations, while extensive screening procedures identify any individuals who may have been compromised during the evacuation process. These facilities operate under martial law conditions, with all residents subject to continuous monitoring and regular psychic screening. The processing period typically extends for several months, allowing sufficient time for any latent enslaver influence to manifest and be detected before refugees receive clearance for resettlement in uncontaminated territories. The criteria for implementing exterminatus protocols against enslaver-infested worlds reflect the imperial understanding that these entities pose existential threats that justify the most extreme responses. The Adeptus Munitorum guidelines specify that exterminatus authorization becomes mandatory when infestation levels reach designatus delta classification and evacuation operations prove unfeasible. The protocols acknowledge that the loss of entire planetary populations represents a tragic but necessary sacrifice to prevent the spread of enslaver influence to neighboring systems and potentially entire sectors. The selection of exterminatus methods for enslaver elimination requires careful consideration of the entity's ability to survive in environments that would destroy conventional organic life. Standard cyclonic torpedo bombardments prove effective against surface infestations, but may not eliminate enslaver specimens that have established deep underground breeding facilities. The guidelines recommend the use of specialized warheads that generate sustained psychic disruption fields, creating conditions that prevent enslaver consciousness from maintaining coherence in real space while simultaneously sterilizing the planetary biosphere. The post-exterminatus monitoring protocols ensure that sterilized worlds remain free of enslaver presence for extended periods before being considered safe for recolonization. These procedures involve regular psychic resonance scans conducted by specialized survey vessels equipped with long-range detection arrays. The monitoring period typically extends for at least one standard century, allowing sufficient time to detect any surviving enslaver specimens that may have endured the sterilization process in dormant states within deep planetary structures. The Scholastica Psychona's screening procedures represent the first line of defense against enslaver infiltration within the Imperium's psychic institutions. These protocols focus on the early detection of alien mental influence among psyker populations before full possession occurs, when intervention remains possible through medical and psychic treatment. The screening process involves regular psychic examinations conducted by trained specialists who can identify the subtle changes in mental patterns that indicate enslaver infiltration attempts. The development of standardized assessment techniques allows Scholastica Psychona instructors to monitor large populations of psyker students for signs of alien influence without requiring extensive specialized training for each examiner. These techniques focus on measurable changes in psychic resonance patterns and behavioral indicators that remain consistent across different types of enslaver infiltration attempts. The assessment protocols include both active psychic probing and passive observation methods, providing multiple layers of detection that increase the likelihood of identifying compromised individuals before they can spread the infestation to their peers. The tragic necessity of eliminating compromised psykers before full possession represents one of the most difficult aspects of imperial anti-enslaver protocols. The Scholastica Psychona guidelines acknowledge that individuals showing advanced signs of enslaver infiltration cannot be saved through conventional treatment methods, requiring immediate termination to prevent the establishment of infestation nodes within psyker training facilities. These elimination procedures must be conducted with extreme care to prevent the spread of neural filaments to execution personnel, typically requiring the use of ranged weapons and specialized containment protocols. The psychological impact of these elimination protocols on Scholastica Psychona personnel requires ongoing support and counseling services to maintain institutional effectiveness. Instructors and administrators who must make life or death decisions about their students often experience significant emotional trauma, particularly when dealing with promising individuals whose potential is lost to alien predation. The institution provides specialized psychological support services designed to help personnel cope with the moral burden of these necessary but tragic decisions. The establishment of isolation protocols for suspected cases allows for more thorough assessment while preventing the spread of potential infestations within training facilities. These procedures involve the immediate quarantine of individuals showing early signs of enslaver influence, providing time for detailed psychic examination and potential intervention before the infiltration process reaches irreversible stages. The isolation facilities incorporate the same psychic dampening technology used in inquisitorial containment operations, creating environments where alien mental influence cannot maintain stable connections with possessed individuals. The development of intervention techniques for early-stage infiltration represents ongoing research efforts aimed at reducing the necessity for elimination protocols. Scholastica Psychona researchers work in collaboration with Ordo Malleus specialists to develop methods for severing enslaver neural connections before they achieve full integration with host consciousness. These experimental procedures show promise in laboratory conditions, but remain extremely dangerous to implement in field situations, requiring specialized equipment and highly trained personnel who may not be available during crisis situations. The Vaxenhive incident of the year 847 of the 41st millennium stands as one of the most thoroughly documented enslaver infestations in imperial records, providing invaluable insights into the operational methods and capabilities of these ancient predators. The hive world of Vaxenhive, located in the Segmentum Obscurus, maintained a population of approximately 40 billion souls, concentrated across 17 massive hive cities. The world's strategic importance stemmed from its role as a major astropathic relay hub, with over 3,000 sanctioned psykers maintaining communication links across an entire subsector. This concentration of psychic talent, combined with the world's dense population centers, created ideal conditions for large-scale enslaver infiltration. The initial signs of alien presence manifested within the astropathic sanctum of Hive Primus, where senior astropaths began reporting shared nightmares featuring vast jellyfish-like entities drifting through spaces between thoughts. These reports, initially dismissed as stress-related phenomena common among overworked psykers, gradually escalated as affected individuals began exhibiting behavioral changes that their colleagues found increasingly disturbing. Master astropath Cornelius Vex, a veteran of 2 centuries of faithful service, began delivering routine communications in monotone voices that stripped all personality from his normally distinctive speaking patterns. The transformation proceeded with methodical precision over a period of 6 months, during which the affected astropaths maintained their operational duties, while gradually converting their colleagues to the growing network of enslaved ones. The entities demonstrated sophisticated understanding of imperial communication protocols, using their possessed hosts to maintain normal message traffic, while simultaneously establishing covert channels for coordinating their expansion throughout the hive. The astropathic choir's hierarchical structure provided ready-made command pathways that the enslavers exploited to spread their influence without triggering security alerts. The first physical manifestation occurred during a routine astropathic transmission to the subsector capital, when Master Vex's cranium began expanding visibly during the sending process. Tech adepts monitoring the transmission chambers reported that his skull became translucent, revealing writhing masses of alien neural tissue beneath the surface. The manifestation process took approximately 4 hours, during which Vex remained conscious and continued his transmission duties even as his human anatomy underwent horrific transformation. The completed enslaver specimen measured nearly 3 meters in diameter, its translucent bell pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hypnotized several unprotected observers. The cascading failure of Vaxenhive's defenses began when enslaver-controlled astropaths began targeting the world's military command structure through selective message interception and modification. Orders dispatched to planetary defense force units were subtly altered to redeploy forces away from critical infrastructure, while requests for reinforcements were delayed or misdirected entirely. The entities demonstrated remarkable understanding of imperial military doctrine, using their knowledge to create defensive gaps that facilitated their expansion into new population centers without triggering coordinated resistance. The construction of infestation nodes throughout Hive Primus followed architectural principles that violated human understanding of structural engineering. Enslaved construction crews, working with inhuman coordination and endurance, erected crystalline spires within the Hive's ventilation systems that served as psychic amplification devices. These structures, composed of materials that existed partially in both real space and the warp, created a network that enhanced the enslavers' ability to maintain control over their expanding population of hosts. The spires generated constant low-frequency psychic emanations that prevented uncontrolled humans from organizing effective resistance while simultaneously attracting additional enslavers from the warp. Imperial Guard forces from the Vaxenhive 47th Regiment encountered their first enslaved ones during routine security sweeps of the Underhive regions, where the entities had established processing facilities for converting captured civilians. The guardsmen reported that their opponents moved with perfect coordination, showing no individual initiative or self-preservation instincts. Wounded enslaved ones continued fighting with mechanical precision even when suffering injuries that would incapacitate normal humans, their alien-controlled nervous systems apparently immune to pain and shock responses that typically disable combatants. The tactical lessons learned from these engagements proved invaluable for subsequent Imperial operations against enslaver forces. Guard commanders discovered that conventional suppression tactics proved ineffective against opponents who felt no fear and showed no concern for casualties among their ranks. The enslaved ones demonstrated perfect battlefield coordination, with individual units executing complex maneuvers without visible or audible communication between them. This hive mind coordination allowed them to anticipate Imperial tactics and respond with countermeasures that suggested access to military knowledge far exceeding that of typical Hive world civilians. The most disturbing aspect of combat against enslaved forces was the gradual conversion of Imperial personnel during extended engagements. Guardsmen who suffered wounds from enslaved opponents began exhibiting signs of possession within hours of contact, as alien neural filaments transmitted through direct physical contact. The Regimental Medical Corps reported that injured personnel developed the characteristic milky eyes and translucent skin that marked the early stages of enslaver infiltration. These conversions created impossible tactical situations where victory became meaningless if it resulted in the corruption of Imperial forces. Colonel Mordian Thex of the 47th Regiment implemented emergency protocols that emphasized long-range engagement and the immediate execution of wounded personnel showing signs of alien influence. These harsh measures, while necessary for preventing the spread of infestation within Imperial ranks, created severe morale problems among troops who found themselves fighting not only against alien-controlled enemies, but also against the possibility of being killed by their own officers if they suffered combat injuries. The psychological impact of these protocols proved almost as devastating as the physical threat posed by the enslavers themselves. The systematic failure of communication networks throughout Vaxenhive created conditions that prevented effective coordination of defensive efforts. As more astropaths fell under enslaver control, the reliability of inter-hive communications deteriorated rapidly. Messages between different Imperial institutions became increasingly garbled or failed to arrive entirely, while false orders began appearing that contradicted established defensive plans. The breakdown of command and control systems allowed the infestation to spread unchecked between different hive cities, as local commanders found themselves unable to coordinate their responses or call for reinforcements. The arrival of Inquisitor Cassandra Vex of the Ordo Malleus marked the beginning of systematic Imperial countermeasures against the Vaxenhive infestation. Her investigation revealed that the enslavers had achieved far greater penetration of planetary infrastructure than initially suspected, with possessed individuals occupying key positions within the Planetary Defense Force, administratum offices, and even the local ecclesiarchy hierarchy. The Inquisitor's use of specialized psychic resonance detection equipment identified over 2,000 confirmed cases of possession across the primary hive alone, indicating that the infestation had reached critical mass. The implementation of exterminatus protocols against Vaxenhive required the deployment of specialized warheads designed to generate sustained psychic disruption fields. Standard cyclonic torpedoes proved insufficient against the deep underground breeding facilities that the enslavers had established in the hive's foundations, where massive specimens had begun producing offspring for expansion to neighboring systems. The psychic disruption warheads created conditions that prevented enslaver consciousness from maintaining coherence in real space while simultaneously sterilizing the planetary biosphere, ensuring complete elimination of the alien threat. The disappearance of explorator fleet Tertius in the year 756 of the 41st millennium provides compelling evidence of enslaver involvement in the systematic elimination of Adeptus Mechanicus expeditions in the galactic fringe. The fleet, consisting of 12 vessels, including the Ark Mechanicus Omnissiah's Will, had been conducting archaeological surveys in the Ghoul Stars region when all communication ceased during their investigation of a system designated Mechanicus Explorator Site 7751. The fleet's last transmission described the discovery of ancient ruins that exhibited technological signatures inconsistent with known Xeno civilizations, suggesting the presence of structures that existed partially in both real space and the warp. Tech Dominus Zerath Krin's final report, recovered from a message drone that escaped the system before the fleet's disappearance, described crystalline formations that generated powerful psychic resonance fields despite being composed of apparently inorganic materials. The structures defied conventional analysis, with their internal architecture following geometries that violated standard physical laws. Most disturbing were the Dominus's observations of servo skulls and other machine spirits exhibiting erratic behavior in proximity to the ruins, suggesting that the alien technology could somehow influence even purely mechanical systems through unknown means. The rescue mission, dispatched 6 months later, found the Explorator fleet's vessels drifting in the outer system, their crews missing, and their machine spirits corrupted by alien influence. The ship's cogitators contained fragmentary records indicating that the tech priests had attempted to study the crystalline structures by establishing research stations on the planet's surface. The final entries described the gradual conversion of expedition members, beginning with the most psychically sensitive tech adepts and spreading through the expedition's hierarchy with methodical precision. The records suggested that the enslavers had used the expedition's own research equipment to enhance their infiltration capabilities, turning the Mechanicus's pursuit of knowledge into a vector for alien domination. The corruption of machine spirits throughout the fleet indicated that enslavers had developed techniques for influencing artificial intelligences through psychic manipulation of their quantum processing matrices. This discovery represented a significant evolution in enslaver capabilities, suggesting that these ancient predators could adapt their methods to exploit the unique vulnerabilities of different target species. The implications for Imperial technology, which relies heavily on machine spirit interfaces, prompted immediate revisions to Adeptus Mechanicus exploration protocols and the development of specialized psychic shielding for critical cogitator systems. The Mordian convergence of the year 923 of the 41st millennium demonstrated the enslavers' ability to coordinate large-scale operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Intelligence reports from the Mordian subsector described a pattern of simultaneous communication blackouts affecting 17 different worlds over a period of just 3 standard days. The affected systems showed no signs of conventional attack or natural disaster, with orbital monitoring stations detecting normal population centers and industrial activity continuing according to established patterns. However, all attempts at astropathic communication with these worlds met with complete silence, suggesting systematic elimination or conversion of their psychic communication networks. Imperial Navy reconnaissance missions to the affected systems discovered populations that appeared to function normally, but exhibited the telltale signs of mass enslaver possession. Planetary defense forces maintained their patrol schedules, industrial facilities continued production operations, and civilian populations went about their daily routines with mechanical precision that betrayed the alien intelligence controlling their actions. The coordination required for simultaneous operations across 17 different worlds indicated the presence of a mature enslaver network with capabilities that exceeded previous Imperial assessments of these entities' strategic planning abilities. The tactical response to the Mordian convergence required unprecedented coordination between multiple Imperial institutions, with the Ordo Malleus directing operations, while Space Marine chapters provided specialized assault capabilities. The Third Company of the Imperial Fists, supported by Grey Knight strike teams, conducted simultaneous planetary assaults designed to disrupt the enslaver network before it could complete its expansion into neighboring systems. The operations revealed that the entities had established specialized communication nodes that maintained psychic links across interstellar distances, creating a hive mind network that spanned multiple light years. The discovery of enslaver breeding facilities on each affected world confirmed fears that the convergence represented a coordinated expansion effort rather than random predation. These facilities, constructed in the deepest levels of planetary infrastructure, housed massive enslaver specimens that had reached maturity levels not previously documented in Imperial records. The breeding chambers contained thousands of developing larvae, each destined for deployment to new target systems once they reached sufficient maturity. The scale of these operations suggested that the enslavers were preparing for expansion efforts that could threaten entire sectors if left unchecked. The era Indomitus has witnessed a disturbing increase in enslaver activity that correlates directly with the formation of the Great Rift and the subsequent increase in warp instability throughout the galaxy. The massive psychic shockwave generated by the cicatrix maledictum's emergence created conditions that allowed enslavers unprecedented access to real space, with manifestations occurring in regions that had previously shown no signs of alien activity. The rift's influence on local warp currents appears to have disrupted the dimensional barriers that normally limit enslaver movement, allowing these ancient predators to emerge in systems that lack the concentrated psychic populations they typically target. The Plague of Whispers that swept through the Nihilist subsector was one of the most significant enslaver outbreaks of the new era. The plague began with reports of shared nightmares among psyker populations across dozens of worlds, with affected individuals describing identical visions of vast jellyfish-like entities emerging from tears in reality itself. The consistency of these reports across multiple unconnected systems suggested the presence of a coordinated infiltration effort that exploited the increased warp instability created by the Great Rift's proximity. The systematic targeting of astropathic relay stations throughout the Nihilist subsector created cascading communication failures that prevented effective coordination of Imperial defensive efforts. Enslaver-controlled astropaths began transmitting false messages that contradicted established military orders while simultaneously blocking legitimate communications from reaching their intended recipients. The entities demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Imperial command structures, using their knowledge to create confusion and misdirection that facilitated their expansion into new systems without triggering coordinated resistance from Imperial forces. The response to the Plague of Whispers required the deployment of specialized Primaris Space Marine units equipped with enhanced psychic resistance modifications developed by Archmagos Belisarius Call. These new Astartes variants incorporated additional psychic shielding in their power armor and underwent extensive mental conditioning designed to resist alien mental influence. The enhanced Marines proved more effective against enslaved opponents than their traditional counterparts, though they still required support from Grey Knight specialists when engaging mature enslaver specimens directly. The investigation of affected systems revealed that the enslavers had developed new manifestation techniques that exploited the dimensional instabilities created by the Great Rift. Rather than requiring powerful psykers as anchor points for their emergence, the entities could now manifest directly through the weakened barriers between real space and the warp. This evolution in their capabilities allowed them to establish footholds in populations with relatively weak psychic potential, significantly expanding their range of viable targets and making detection more difficult for Imperial screening protocols. The Cadian Gate's destruction during the 13th Black Crusade created additional complications for anti-enslaver operations, as the loss of this strategic choke point allowed the entities to spread more freely between the Segmentum Obscurus and neighboring regions. Intelligence reports from the post-Cadia period describe enslaver manifestations in systems that had maintained clean records for millennia, suggesting that the entities are exploiting the chaos and confusion of the current era to establish new colonies in previously secure territories. The breakdown of established communication networks and supply lines has made it increasingly difficult for Imperial forces to maintain the comprehensive monitoring systems necessary for early detection of enslaver infiltration. The ancient archives of Craftworld Ulthwé contain some of the most comprehensive records of enslaver activity outside of Imperial documentation, their crystalline memory cores preserving observations that span millions of years of galactic history. Farseer Eldred Ulthrin's personal chronicles describe encounters with what the Eldar term Kur-Wise, literally translated as the Devourers of Tomorrow, dating back to the height of the Eldar Empire when their psychic mastery reached its zenith. These records reveal that Eldar seers recognized enslavers as a fundamental threat to psychically gifted species long before humanity developed the cognitive capacity to understand such dangers. The Eldar understanding of enslaver behavior patterns stems from their unique perspective as a species that survived the entity's predation during the War in Heaven. Their archives describe vast Eldar colonies that vanished overnight during the Empire's expansion phase, leaving behind only empty cities and the psychic echoes of mass terror. The consistency of these disappearances across multiple sectors led ancient Eldar scholars to recognize a pattern of systematic predation that targeted the most psychically advanced populations first. This knowledge shaped Eldar expansion policies for millennia, with new colonies established only after extensive psychic reconnaissance to detect potential enslaver presence. Farseer prophecies recorded in the Dome of Crystal Seers speak of future resurgences, when the hunger from beyond shall wake to feast upon the dying light of stars. These visions describe scenarios where enslaver swarms emerge from the deepest reaches of the warp to consume the psychic potential of entire galactic sectors, drawn by the increasing instability that characterizes the current era. The prophecies suggest that the Great Rift's formation has created conditions similar to those that existed during the War in Heaven, when dimensional barriers were weakened and enslavers could manifest with unprecedented ease. The most disturbing aspect of these prophetic visions involves descriptions of galaxy-ending scenarios where enslaver populations reach critical mass and begin systematically harvesting all psychic life. The seers describe a future where the entities establish permanent colonies throughout the galaxy, their breeding cycles producing offspring faster than conventional military forces can eliminate them. In these visions, the enslavers eventually consume not only individual psykers, but entire species' psychic potential, leaving behind a galaxy populated only by mindless automatons under alien control. Eldar Farseers possess unique insights into enslaver psychology due to their ability to perceive these entities' presence within the warp before physical manifestation occurs. Their psychic sight reveals enslavers as vast predatory intelligences that drift through the immaterium like cosmic jellyfish, following psychic currents toward their prey with patient determination. The seers describe these creatures as possessing a cold, calculating intelligence that operates on timescales incomprehensible to shorter-lived species, planning their infestations across centuries or millennia while waiting for optimal conditions to emerge. The Eldar's advanced understanding of warp dynamics allows them to recognize the environmental conditions that attract enslaver attention. Their observations indicate that these entities are drawn to regions where the barrier between realspace and the immaterium has been weakened by excessive psychic activity, major warp storms, or the presence of other dimensional anomalies. This knowledge enables Eldar craftworlds to avoid areas where enslaver manifestations are likely to occur, though their prophetic abilities sometimes reveal that such avoidance may be impossible during periods of galactic crisis. Craftworld military doctrines include specific protocols for engaging enslaver forces, developed through bitter experience during the fall of the Eldar Empire. These tactics emphasize the importance of maintaining psychic discipline and avoiding prolonged exposure to possessed populations. Eldar aspect warriors receive specialized training in recognizing the signs of enslaver influence and techniques for severing the psychic connections that allow these entities to maintain control over their hosts. The Ghost Warrior constructs prove particularly effective against enslaved opponents, as their artificial nature makes them immune to the neural filament transmission that can convert living combatants during physical contact. The Tau Empire's first recorded encounter with enslaver entities occurred during the Third Sphere expansion, when water-cast exploration fleets penetrated regions of space with unusually high levels of psychic activity. The Tau's limited psychic abilities initially appeared to provide protection against enslaver infiltration, as their species lacks the powerful psychic signatures that typically attract these predators. However, their expansion into territories previously inhabited by more psychically active species brought them into contact with dormant enslaver colonies that had remained hidden since the destruction of their original host populations. The Sept world of Viorla became the site of the Tau's most significant enslaver encounter, when Earth-cast survey teams investigating ancient ruins discovered crystalline structures that exhibited properties inconsistent with known physics. The structures generated powerful electromagnetic fields that interfered with Tau technology, while simultaneously producing psychic emanations that affected even the Tau's limited psychic sensitivity. Earth-caste scientists, driven by their species' natural curiosity and desire for technological advancement, established research stations to study these anomalous formations despite growing evidence of their dangerous nature. The systematic study of enslaver artifacts by Tau researchers provides unique insights into these entities' technological capabilities and their methods of environmental manipulation. Earth-caste analysis revealed that the crystalline structures functioned as dimensional anchors that maintained stable connections between real space and the warp, allowing enslavers to manifest without requiring powerful psykers as focal points. The technology involved quantum manipulation techniques that exceeded Tau understanding, suggesting that enslavers possessed scientific knowledge accumulated over millions of years of galactic predation. Tau attempts to reverse engineer enslaver technology led to several catastrophic incidents as research teams inadvertently activated dormant systems within the crystalline structures. These activations created localized dimensional instabilities that allowed enslaver consciousness to begin manifesting in the research facilities. The entity's initial attempts at possession proved largely ineffective against Tau subjects due to their species' limited psychic development, but the aliens adapted their techniques to exploit the Tau's technological dependence and social cohesion instead. The adaptation of enslaver infiltration methods to target Tau populations demonstrated these ancient predators' remarkable ability to modify their approaches based on the specific vulnerabilities of different species. Rather than attempting direct neural domination, the entities began manipulating Tau technology systems and social structures to achieve control over their targets. They exploited the Tau's reliance on advanced communication networks and artificial intelligence systems, using their understanding of quantum mechanics to corrupt these technologies and turn them against their creators. Firecast responses to enslaver manifestations revealed both the strengths and limitations of Tau military doctrine when confronting psychic threats. Tau battle suits and weapon systems proved effective against enslaved opponents in conventional combat, as their advanced targeting systems and superior firepower could eliminate possessed individuals before they could close to melee range. However, the Tau's emphasis on technological solutions and combined arms tactics proved inadequate when dealing with enemies that could corrupt their equipment and communication systems through psychic manipulation. The development of specialized anti-psychic protocols by Tau military commanders required significant modifications to established tactical doctrines. Firecast units operating in areas with suspected enslaver presence began employing simplified communication methods and mechanical backup systems that could function independently of their advanced electronic networks. These adaptations reduced the effectiveness of Tau combined arms tactics, but provided necessary protection against enemies that could exploit their technological sophistication. Orc encounters with enslaver entities present a fascinating study in the interaction between different types of psychic phenomena, as the greenskin species' unique relationship with warp energy creates conditions that significantly complicate enslaver infiltration attempts. The Orc Gestalt psychic field, generated by the collective unconscious of Orc populations, creates a form of psychic background noise that interferes with the precise neural connections that enslavers require to establish control over individual hosts. This interference does not provide complete immunity to enslaver possession, but it significantly reduces the success rate of infiltration attempts and makes it more difficult for the entities to maintain stable control over Orc subjects. The crude but powerful nature of Orc psychic abilities creates additional complications for enslaver operations, as the chaotic and unpredictable nature of greenskin psychic emanations makes it difficult for the entities to establish the precise psychic resonance patterns they require for successful possession. Orc weirdboys, the species' primary psychic specialists, generate such intense and erratic psychic fields that enslavers often find it impossible to establish stable neural connections without risking damage to their own consciousness. The random nature of orc psychic abilities means that possession attempts may succeed initially, but then fail catastrophically when the host's psychic field fluctuates beyond the enslaver's ability to control. Combat encounters between orc forces and enslaver-controlled populations demonstrate the unique advantages that greenskin psychology provides against these ancient predators. Orcs' natural aggression and tendency toward violence make them less susceptible to the psychological manipulation techniques that enslavers use to weaken other species' mental defenses. The greenskin concept of a good fight means that orcs often welcome combat against enslaved opponents, viewing them as interesting new enemies rather than terrifying alien threats. This psychological resilience, combined with their species' natural psychic resistance, makes orcs among the most effective conventional forces for combating enslaver infestations. The reaction of orc weirdboys to enslaver presence varies significantly depending on the individual's psychic strength and the specific nature of the alien entities they encounter. Weaker weirdboys often experience severe psychic feedback when exposed to enslaver neural networks, as their crude psychic abilities prove incompatible with the sophisticated mental control systems that these entities employ. However, more powerful weirdboys sometimes demonstrate an ability to disrupt enslaver operations through the sheer chaotic force of their psychic emanations, creating interference patterns that can sever the connections between possessed individuals and their alien masters. The unpredictable nature of orc psychic phenomena creates situations where weirdboys can inadvertently provide protection for entire orc populations against enslaver infiltration. The random psychic storms generated by these individuals during combat can create localized areas of psychic turbulence that prevent enslavers from maintaining stable manifestations in real space. This protective effect proves temporary and unreliable, but it can provide crucial advantages during combat operations against enslaver-controlled forces. Orc Technology's crude but effective design philosophy provides additional advantages when confronting enemies that rely on sophisticated psychic manipulation techniques. Greenskin weapons and vehicles operate according to principles that combine mechanical function with psychic belief, creating systems that prove remarkably resistant to the technological corruption that enslavers can inflict on more advanced equipment. The orcs' tendency to build redundant and overpowered systems means that their technology often continues functioning even when subjected to psychic interference that would disable more sophisticated alternatives. The Tyranid hive mind's encounters with enslaver-infested worlds present one of the most complex scenarios in galactic predation dynamics, as two vastly different forms of collective consciousness compete for control over the same biological resources. The hive mind's approach to consuming enslaver-controlled populations differs significantly from its standard biomass harvesting operations, as the presence of alien psychic entities within the target organisms creates complications that require specialized adaptation of Tyranid bioforms and tactics. Initial Tyranid invasions of enslaver-infested worlds typically proceed according to standard hive fleet protocols, with scout organisms conducting reconnaissance while larger bioforms prepare for planetary assault. However, the psychic emanations generated by enslaver colonies create interference patterns that disrupt the hive mind's ability to coordinate its forces effectively. The alien neural networks established by enslavers generate psychic static that interferes with the synaptic communication systems that Tyranid organisms use to maintain their collective coordination. The hive mind's response to this interference involves the rapid evolution of specialized bioforms designed to operate independently of the standard synaptic network while maintaining basic coordination capabilities. These adapted organisms demonstrate increased individual intelligence and decision-making capacity compared to standard Tyranid bioforms, allowing them to function effectively even when subjected to the psychic disruption generated by enslaver colonies. The development of these specialized variants represents a significant adaptation in tyrannid evolutionary strategy, suggesting that the hive mind recognizes enslavers as a unique threat requiring specific countermeasures. Combat between tyrannid forces and enslaved populations reveals fundamental differences in the nature of collective consciousness employed by these two alien species. While tyrannid organisms operate as extensions of a single overarching intelligence, enslaved individuals retain their original personalities and memories while being controlled by alien parasites. This difference creates tactical advantages for tyrannid forces, as their opponents' retained human psychology makes them predictable in ways that purely alien intelligences would not be. The hive mind's attempts to consume enslaver-controlled biomass encounter significant complications due to the presence of alien neural tissue within the target organisms. Standard tyrannid digestion processes prove ineffective against enslaver neural filaments, which resist absorption and can potentially contaminate tyrannid bioforms that attempt to consume them. This resistance forces the hive mind to develop specialized consumption organisms capable of breaking down alien neural matter without risking contamination of the broader tyrannid organism pool. The question of whether the hive mind's psychic dominance provides protection against enslaver parasitism remains a subject of intense study among imperial xenobiologists. Theoretical analysis suggests that the hive mind's overwhelming psychic presence should prevent individual tyrannid organisms from being targeted by enslaver infiltration attempts, as their consciousness exists as part of a larger collective rather than as independent entities. However, limited field observations indicate that enslavers may be capable of adapting their techniques to exploit the synaptic connections that link individual tyrannid organisms to the broader hive mind. The implications of potential enslaver infiltration of tyrannid bioforms represent one of the most terrifying scenarios contemplated by imperial strategic planners. A successful fusion of enslaver neural control techniques with tyrannid biological adaptability could produce hybrid organisms that combine the worst aspects of both species: the tyrannid's relentless consumption drive enhanced by the enslaver's sophisticated psychic manipulation capabilities. Such entities would pose existential threats to all organic life in the galaxy, possessing both the biological perfection of tyrannid evolution and the ancient cunning of enslaver intelligence. The ecclesiarchy's doctrinal position on enslavers represents one of the most complex theological challenges faced by imperial religious authorities since the establishment of the imperial cult. Cardinal Ignatius Mordian's seminal work, The Emperor's Wrath Against the Unclean Mind, establishes the orthodox interpretation that views enslavers as divine instruments of punishment deployed against those who would dare to wield psychic power without proper sanctification and imperial oversight. This theological framework positions enslaver manifestations not as random predatory events, but as deliberate expressions of the emperor's displeasure with uncontrolled psychic development and the dangers inherent in unsanctioned psychic ability. The doctrinal foundation for this interpretation stems from extensive analysis of historical enslaver outbreaks, which demonstrate a clear pattern of targeting populations with high concentrations of untrained or rogue psykers. The ecclesiarchy's theological scholars point to the systematic destruction of psychically advanced civilizations during the Age of Strife as evidence that the emperor, even in his mortal form, recognized the necessity of controlling psychic development to prevent such catastrophic predation. The establishment of the Scholastica Psychona and the rigorous training protocols for sanctioned psykers represent the emperor's wisdom in providing humanity with protection against these ancient threats through proper spiritual discipline and imperial oversight. Cardinal Vex's controversial treatise, The Divine Parasites, expands this theological framework by arguing that enslavers serve as the emperor's agents in purging psychic corruption from human populations. This interpretation suggests that the entity's selective targeting of the most psychically gifted individuals represents a form of divine quality control, eliminating those whose abilities might otherwise lead to chaos, corruption, or other forms of spiritual contamination. The cardinal's analysis of enslaver behavior patterns reveals what he interprets as deliberate preservation of baseline human populations, arguing that this selectivity demonstrates divine purpose rather than simple predatory instinct. The theological implications of viewing enslavers as instruments of divine will create significant complications for imperial doctrine regarding the treatment of possessed individuals. Traditional ecclesiarchy teaching emphasizes the importance of purging corruption through fire and blade, but the interpretation of enslavers as divine agents raises questions about whether resistance to their influence constitutes defiance of the emperor's will. Some radical theologians have argued that individuals selected for enslaver possession should be viewed as chosen for divine service, though this interpretation remains highly controversial and has been condemned by mainstream ecclesiarchy authorities. The debate among imperial scholars about the fundamental nature of enslavers reflects deeper philosophical questions about the relationship between psychic evolution and the natural order of the universe. Magos Biologies calls extensive xenobiological studies suggest that enslavers represent a natural evolutionary response to the development of psychic abilities in organic species, functioning as a regulatory mechanism that prevents any single species from achieving psychic dominance over the galaxy's ecosystem. This interpretation positions enslavers as part of the natural order rather than aberrant corruption, suggesting that their predation serves to maintain balance within the galactic community of psychic species. The biological determinism inherent in Call's analysis conflicts sharply with the theological interpretations favored by ecclesiarchy scholars, creating ongoing tensions between scientific and religious approaches to understanding enslaver phenomena. The Adeptus Mechanicus perspective emphasizes the mechanical precision of enslaver operations and their apparent optimization for maximum efficiency in psychic energy harvesting, characteristics that suggest evolutionary adaptation rather than divine intervention. This scientific framework views enslaver behavior as the result of millions of years of natural selection operating within the unique environment of the warp, producing predators perfectly adapted to exploit the vulnerabilities of psychically active species. The philosophical implications of the evolutionary interpretation extend beyond simple academic debate to fundamental questions about humanity's place in the galactic ecosystem. If enslavers represent a natural response to psychic development, then humanity's increasing psychic awakening may be driving the species toward an inevitable evolutionary bottleneck, where only those individuals capable of resisting enslaver predation will survive to reproduce. This scenario suggests that the current era's rising psychic activity may represent a crucial phase in human evolution, with enslavers serving as a selective pressure that will ultimately strengthen humanity's psychic capabilities through the elimination of vulnerable individuals. Counter-arguments to the evolutionary interpretation focus on the apparent intelligence and strategic planning capabilities demonstrated by enslaver colonies, characteristics that exceed what would be expected from simple biological predators. The entity's ability to coordinate operations across multiple star systems simultaneously, and their sophisticated understanding of different species, technological and social structures suggest conscious intelligence rather than instinctive behavior. This evidence supports interpretations that view enslavers as active agents pursuing deliberate goals rather than passive participants in evolutionary processes. The moral and ethical dilemmas faced by imperial commanders when dealing with populations that include both innocent civilians and enslaver-controlled individuals represent some of the most challenging decisions in imperial military doctrine. The traditional imperial approach to alien corruption emphasizes the complete elimination of contaminated populations to prevent the spread of alien influence, but the presence of uncontaminated civilians within enslaver-infested areas creates impossible tactical situations where military necessity conflicts with the imperial duty to protect human life. Colonel Voss Strakens, after action reports from the Mordian Convergence, described the psychological toll of combat operations, where Imperial forces must engage opponents who retain their human appearance and behavior patterns despite being under alien control. The enslaved one's retention of their original personalities and memories makes them appear as victims rather than enemies, creating moral confusion among Imperial troops who struggle to reconcile their duty to eliminate alien threats with their natural reluctance to kill apparently innocent civilians. The knowledge that possessed individuals remain conscious and aware of their actions while being unable to control them adds another layer of tragedy to these encounters. The development of protocols for distinguishing between possessed and uncontaminated individuals within mixed populations requires Imperial forces to make life or death decisions based on subtle behavioral indicators and unreliable detection equipment. The margin for error in these assessments means that innocent civilians may be executed as suspected enslaved ones, while actual possessed individuals may escape detection and continue spreading the infestation. The psychological burden of making these decisions often proves as devastating to Imperial personnel as the physical dangers of combat against enslaver forces. The question of whether possessed individuals can be considered morally responsible for their actions while under enslaver control creates additional complications for Imperial justice systems. Traditional Imperial law assumes that individuals retain agency and can be held accountable for their choices, but the complete neural domination exercised by enslavers eliminates the possibility of free will among possessed subjects. This situation creates legal paradoxes where individuals who commit atrocities while under alien control cannot be held responsible for their actions, yet their continued existence poses ongoing threats to Imperial security. The theological implications of enslaver possession extend to fundamental questions about the nature of the human soul and its relationship to consciousness. Ecclesiarchy doctrine maintains that the soul remains intact even when the body falls under alien control, suggesting that possessed individuals continue to exist as spiritual entities despite their physical corruption. This interpretation provides theological justification for the mercy killing of possessed individuals, framing their execution as liberation of trapped souls rather than murder of innocent victims. However, this doctrine also raises disturbing questions about the spiritual status of individuals who survive extended periods of possession, particularly regarding whether their souls remain untainted by their experiences under alien control. The practical application of these theological principles in battlefield conditions requires Imperial commanders to balance spiritual considerations with tactical necessities. The Ecclesiarchy's emphasis on the sanctity of the human soul conflicts with the military requirement for rapid decision-making in combat situations, creating operational delays that can prove tactically disadvantageous when facing coordinated enslaver forces. The development of specialized chaplain units trained in rapid spiritual assessment represents one attempt to reconcile these competing demands, though the effectiveness of such measures remains limited by the time constraints inherent in active combat operations. Chaos Space Marine perspectives on enslavers reveal the complex relationship between different forms of warp-based entities and their competing claims on mortal consciousness. The Thousand Sons' extensive experience with psychic phenomena provides unique insights into enslaver capabilities and weaknesses, though their chaos corruption limits the reliability of intelligence gathered from these sources. Sorcerer Lord Ahriman's personal grimoire contains detailed observations of enslaver behavior during the Siege of Prospero, describing these entities as thieves of potential that steal psychic energy that might otherwise fuel the great game between the Chaos Gods. The competition between enslavers and chaos entities for control over psychically gifted individuals creates situations where the servants of the Dark Gods find themselves opposing alien predation not out of altruism, but to protect valuable resources from consumption by rival powers. This dynamic results in complex three-way conflicts where Imperial forces, Chaos Space Marines, and enslaver-controlled populations engage in shifting alliances and betrayals as each faction pursues its own objectives. The unpredictable nature of these multi-faction encounters makes them particularly dangerous for Imperial forces, who must simultaneously guard against chaos, corruption, and enslaver possession while trying to achieve their military objectives. The Alpha Legion's documented attempts to manipulate enslaver infestations for their own purposes demonstrate the potential for these ancient predators to be exploited as weapons against Imperial targets. Intelligence reports from the Badab War describe Alpha Legion operatives deliberately triggering enslaver manifestations in Loyalist-controlled systems, using the resulting chaos and confusion to mask their own infiltration operations. These incidents suggest that sufficiently cunning adversaries can weaponize enslaver predation against Imperial forces, turning humanity's ancient enemies into tools for more recent betrayals. The word-bearers' theological interpretation of enslavers as the first apostates reflects their belief that these entities represent the original rebellion against the natural order that predates even the fall of the Primarchs to chaos. Dark Apostle Erebus's heretical writings describe enslavers as entities that rejected their proper place in the cosmic hierarchy, choosing predation over worship and consumption over devotion. This interpretation positions enslavers as cautionary examples of what happens when intelligent beings refuse to acknowledge higher powers, though the word-bearers' chaos corruption makes their theological insights highly suspect. The Iron Warrior's pragmatic approach to enslaver encounters focuses on the tactical and strategic challenges posed by these entities rather than their theological or philosophical implications. Warsmith Hansu's siege manuals include detailed sections on combating enslaver-controlled defenders, emphasizing the importance of avoiding prolonged engagements that allow for the spread of alien influence among attacking forces. The Iron Warrior's experience with extended siege operations provides valuable insights into the logistical challenges of maintaining military effectiveness while operating in areas with active enslaver infestations. The Night Lord's use of terror tactics against enslaver-controlled populations reveals the psychological limitations of possessed individuals when confronted with extreme fear stimuli. The entity's neural control systems appear to suppress normal fear responses in their hosts, making traditional intimidation techniques ineffective against enslaved populations. However, the Night Lords have discovered that certain forms of psychological warfare can disrupt the psychic connections between enslavers and their hosts, creating temporary windows of opportunity for more direct intervention methods. The documented cases of chaos sorcerers attempting to bind or control enslaver entities represent some of the most dangerous experiments in psychic manipulation recorded in Imperial archives. The Black Legion sorcerer Zaraphistan's attempts to enslave an enslaver specimen during the 13th Black Crusade resulted in a catastrophic psychic backlash that destroyed his entire coven and created a permanent warp rift in the Cadian system. The failure of this binding attempt suggests that enslavers possess inherent resistance to the control techniques typically employed by chaos sorcerers, possibly due to their ancient origins and fundamental alien nature. The theoretical frameworks developed by chaos scholars for understanding enslaver psychology emphasize the entity's apparent immunity to the emotional manipulation that forms the basis of most chaos corruption techniques. Unlike mortal beings, who can be tempted by promises of power, knowledge, or pleasure, enslavers appear to operate according to purely pragmatic motivations focused on survival and reproduction. This emotional detachment makes them poor candidates for chaos corruption, though some heretical texts suggest that sufficiently powerful chaos entities might be able to exploit enslaver reproductive drives for their own purposes. The relationship between enslavers and the chaos gods themselves remains largely theoretical, as direct observations of such interactions are extremely rare and typically result in the destruction of any witnesses. Some Imperial scholars theorize that the chaos gods view enslavers as competitors for the psychic energy that fuels warp entities, creating natural antagonism between these different forms of alien consciousness. This interpretation suggests that the current era's increasing chaos activity may actually provide some protection against enslaver expansion, as the two forms of warp predation compete for the same resources and prey species. The opening of the Great Rift in the closing years of the 41st millennium has fundamentally transformed the threat landscape that enslavers present to galactic civilization. The massive psychic shockwave generated by the Cicatrix maledictum's emergence created unprecedented opportunities for these ancient predators to manifest in regions that had remained secure for millennia. Imperial monitoring stations throughout the galaxy report a threefold increase in confirmed enslaver sightings since the Rift's formation, with manifestations occurring in systems that previously showed no indicators of psychic instability or alien presence. The correlation between warp storm activity and enslaver manifestations has become increasingly pronounced in the era following the Great Rift's creation. Astropathic relay stations, positioned near major warp disturbances, report systematic targeting by entities that demonstrate unprecedented coordination and strategic planning capabilities. The storm systems that rage throughout the Imperium Nihilus create ideal conditions for enslaver infiltration, as the weakened barriers between real space and the immaterium allow these creatures to manifest without requiring the powerful psyker hosts that previously served as their primary anchor points. Sector Command Intelligence reports from the Vigilus campaign describe enslaver manifestations that exploited the psychic turbulence generated by the massive Orc-Wa and subsequent Imperial defensive operations. The entities appeared to coordinate their emergence with periods of maximum psychic activity, using the chaotic emanations from the multi-faction conflict to mask their infiltration of Imperial positions. This tactical sophistication suggests that modern enslavers have evolved beyond their ancient predatory patterns to become active participants in galactic warfare rather than simple opportunistic parasites. The systematic analysis of post-Rift enslaver encounters reveals disturbing adaptations in their operational methods. Unlike historical infestations that followed predictable patterns of gradual infiltration and exponential expansion, contemporary manifestations demonstrate immediate coordination across multiple target sites simultaneously. Imperial forces responding to suspected enslaver activity increasingly find themselves facing coordinated multi-vector attacks that suggest central command structures operating across interstellar distances. The entities appear to have developed communication methods that function independently of conventional psychic networks, possibly exploiting the dimensional instabilities created by the Great Rift itself. Strategic planning documents prepared by the High Lords of Terra acknowledge that current Imperial defensive capabilities may prove inadequate against the scale of enslaver activity anticipated in the coming centuries. The Adeptus Munitorum's resource allocation models predict that maintaining effective anti-enslaver protocols across the Imperium's remaining territories will require a minimum 20% increase in specialized personnel and equipment. This demand comes at a time when Imperial resources are already stretched to breaking point by ongoing conflicts with Chaos forces, Tyranid hive fleets, and the expanding Tau Empire. The development of predictive models for enslaver activity represents one of the most significant advances in Imperial strategic planning since the formation of the Ordo Malleus. Magos Biologies calls analytical engines process vast quantities of data from astropathic communications, warp storm tracking stations, and xenobiological survey reports to identify patterns that indicate potential enslaver manifestation sites. These predictive algorithms demonstrate 73% accuracy in identifying systems that experience enslaver activity within 6 standard months of initial assessment, though the models become increasingly unreliable when attempting to predict manifestations beyond this timeframe. The integration of predictive analysis with Imperial defensive planning allows for the pre-positioning of specialized anti-enslaver assets in high-risk systems before manifestations occur. Strike cruisers equipped with Grey Knight's rapid response teams maintain patrol routes that position them within maximum warp jump distance of predicted manifestation sites. This proactive approach has proven effective in containing several incipient infestations before they could achieve critical mass, though the resource requirements for maintaining such extensive coverage strain Imperial naval capabilities. Imperial strategists face the sobering reality that enslaver expansion rates may exceed the Imperium's capacity for effective response if current trends continue unchecked. Mathematical models developed by the Adeptus Administratum suggest that exponential growth in enslaver populations could result in the consumption of entire subsectors within decades if the entities achieve successful establishment of major breeding colonies. The implications of such scenarios extend beyond simple territorial loss to fundamental questions about humanity's long-term survival as a psychically active species. The potential for enslaver interference with ongoing imperial conflicts against other major threats creates additional strategic complications that commanders must consider when planning military operations. The entity's demonstrated ability to exploit psychic turbulence generated by large-scale warfare means that major campaigns against chaos forces or tyrannid hive fleets may inadvertently create conditions that facilitate enslaver manifestations. Imperial forces increasingly find themselves fighting multi-front conflicts, where victory against one enemy may create vulnerabilities that other threats can exploit. The impact of enslaver activity on Imperial supply lines and communication networks poses particular challenges for military operations in the current era. The entity's systematic targeting of astropathic relay stations and psyker-dependent transportation systems can effectively isolate entire sectors from Imperial command and control structures. The loss of psychic communication capabilities forces Imperial forces to rely on slower and less reliable methods of coordination, creating operational delays that can prove decisive in rapidly evolving tactical situations. The Adeptus Mechanicus has responded to the escalating enslaver threat through an ambitious program of technological development focused on creating new detection and countermeasure systems. The most promising advancement involves the development of enhanced psychic dampening field generators that can create localized areas of psychic null space, preventing enslaver manifestation within protected zones. These devices represent a significant evolution from earlier null field technologies, incorporating quantum resonance dampeners that can disrupt the dimensional bridges that enslavers use to cross from the warp into real space. The deployment of psychic dampening fields faces significant technical challenges related to power requirements and operational stability. The energy demands for maintaining effective null field coverage over areas larger than individual buildings exceed the capacity of most Imperial power generation systems, limiting the practical applications of this technology to critical installations such as astropathic relay stations and command centers. Additionally, the complex quantum interactions involved in psychic dampening create interference patterns that can disrupt other Imperial technologies, including Vox communication systems and machine spirit interfaces. Research into portable psychic dampening devices has produced experimental equipment that individual soldiers can carry into combat zones with suspected enslaver activity. These personal dampening units create localized null fields with radii of approximately 10 meters, providing protection for small Imperial units operating in high-risk environments. Field testing of prototype devices during the Mordian Convergence demonstrated their effectiveness in preventing enslaver possession of equipped personnel, though the unit's limited battery life and vulnerability to physical damage restrict their operational utility. The development of enhanced detection systems represents another major focus of Adeptus Mechanicus research efforts. Advanced psychic resonance scanners can identify enslaver neural signatures at ranges exceeding 50 kilometers, providing early warning of alien presence before physical manifestation occurs. These devices incorporate machine spirit interfaces that can process the complex psychic emanation patterns associated with enslaver activity, distinguishing them from background psychic noise and other warp phenomena that might generate false positive readings. The integration of detection systems with automated response protocols allows for the rapid deployment of countermeasures without requiring human operators who might be vulnerable to enslaver influence. Servo-skull networks equipped with miniaturized resonance scanners can provide continuous monitoring of large areas while remaining immune to the psychic manipulation techniques that enslavers use against organic personnel. These automated systems can trigger alarm protocols and initiate containment procedures faster than human operators, though their effectiveness depends on proper maintenance and regular calibration by qualified tech adepts. The question of whether enslavers represent an existential threat to all psychic life in the galaxy has become a central concern for Imperial strategic planners and xenobiological researchers. The entity's demonstrated ability to adapt their methods to exploit the specific vulnerabilities of different species suggests that no psychically active civilization may be immune to their predation. The systematic consumption of entire species' psychic potential could result in a galaxy populated only by non-psychic organisms, fundamentally altering the balance of power between different forms of life and intelligence. Theoretical models developed by the Ordo Malleus suggest that unchecked enslaver expansion could lead to a cascade effect where the consumption of psychic species reduces the overall level of psychic activity in the galaxy to the point where warp travel becomes impossible. Such a scenario would effectively fragment galactic civilization into isolated systems unable to maintain contact or coordinate their activities. The implications extend beyond simple territorial loss to the complete collapse of interstellar civilization as it currently exists. The potential for enslaver adaptation to target non-psychic species represents an even more disturbing possibility that some Imperial scholars consider increasingly likely. The entity's demonstrated intelligence and evolutionary flexibility suggest that they might develop techniques for exploiting other forms of consciousness if psychic prey becomes scarce. The consumption of baseline human populations or even artificial intelligences could provide alternative energy sources that would allow enslavers to survive and reproduce even in a galaxy depleted of psychic life. Counter-arguments to these apocalyptic scenarios emphasize the natural limitations that govern enslaver expansion and the potential for other galactic powers to provide effective resistance. The entity's dependence on psychic energy for reproduction and manifestation creates inherent bottlenecks in their expansion capabilities, while their vulnerability to certain forms of anti-psychic warfare provides opportunities for organized resistance. The diversity of galactic civilization means that even successful enslaver campaigns against one species or region may encounter different challenges when expanding into new territories. The role of the Chaos Gods in potentially limiting enslaver expansion remains a subject of intense debate among Imperial scholars. Some theories suggest that the increasing influence of chaos throughout the galaxy may actually provide protection against enslaver predation, as the two forms of warp-based entities compete for the same psychic resources. The emotional turmoil and spiritual corruption that fuel chaos manifestations could create psychic environments that are hostile to enslaver infiltration, though this protection would come at the cost of increased demonic activity and chaos corruption. The emergence of new psychic phenomena in the wake of the Great Rift's formation may also influence the long-term trajectory of enslaver expansion. The birth of new chaos entities and the evolution of existing warp phenomena could create environmental pressures that force enslavers to adapt their methods or compete more directly with other forms of alien intelligence. The dynamic nature of the warp means that current patterns of enslaver activity may not remain stable over extended periods, though predicting the direction of such changes remains beyond current Imperial analytical capabilities. The ultimate consequences of unchecked enslaver expansion extend beyond the immediate threat to human civilization to fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and intelligence in the galaxy. If these ancient predators succeed in consuming the psychic potential of all sentient species, the the resulting universe would be dominated by forms of life that operate according to purely material principles. Such a transformation would represent not just the end of humanity's psychic evolution, but the elimination of the very concept of psychic development from galactic civilization. As the Imperium enters the 42nd millennium, the enslaver threat looms as one of the most significant challenges facing human survival. The ancient hunger that has stalked psychic species since the galaxy's youth has awakened to find unprecedented opportunities for expansion in an era of increasing warp instability and psychic awakening. Whether humanity's technological innovations, military capabilities, and spiritual resilience will prove sufficient to resist this primordial threat remains the ultimate test of the species' fitness for survival in a galaxy that has never been more dangerous or uncertain. The Emperor's vision of humanity's psychic ascension now stands in direct opposition to forces that would consume that very potential, making the coming centuries a crucial period that will determine not just the fate of the Imperium, but the future of consciousness itself in the Milky Way galaxy. The eternal threat persists, patient as the void between stars, waiting for the next opportunity to feast upon the dreams and aspirations of a species that dares to touch the power of gods. In this cosmic struggle between predator and prey, between ancient hunger and evolving potential, the very soul of the galaxy hangs in the balance.